And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for May 24th. No, it's not May 24th. It's June 4th, June 3rd, 2024. Going to get the date right. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight. Item number 1 is a discussion and update on accessory dwelling units. Item number 2 is a short-term rental code compliance update. Item number 3 is an affordable housing strategy implementation of inclusionary housing zoning program. We will start our program as we do most meetings with folks that have signed up to speak from the public to talk with us on any of these 3 items. I have no one signed up in council, and I have no one joining us online, so we will go to our next order of business, which is agenda item number 1, accessory dwelling units. Just for the record, I'd like to note that all of our counselors are here, and we appreciate you being here. So, Mr. Goff, would you like to introduce item number 1?
I will. We were just joking a little bit here, Scott and I, about we thought the chambers would be full with these 3 exciting topics this evening. But I'm sure everybody's going to watch the reruns on YouTube. So, Lauren, you going to introduce or turn it right over to Scott? Okay, we're going to turn it over to Scott. We have a few updates on accessory dwelling units based on recent legislation that passed and some recommendations that we have on some changes to our code. Scott?
Thanks. So as we all know, City Council approved the original ADU ordinance allowing accessory dwelling units in Wheat Ridge in July of 2022, and it became effective on August 15th, 2022, and it's now been a little over a year and a half since ADUs, both new and then pathways to legalize existing ADUs have been allowed in Wheat Ridge. So we have 3 kind of ish discussion topics tonight. First is to talk through current status of ADUs in Wheat Ridge. Then we'll go over some of staff's recommendations regarding the grace period for existing ADUs. And then lastly, we'll go into some implications and opportunities of the recent state legislation that passed HB 24-1152 regarding ADUs statewide. So just to give council a quick update, since August 15th of 2022, we have permitted 16 new ADUs, 12 are approved and are pending or under construction, 4 have been completed, and then 13 existing ADUs have also been legalized. And there's also 1 ADU still under staff's review, not yet permitted. I think overall, I spoke with the rest of the planners that review this as well. We think it's going really well for the most part. There's probably still some public education needed regarding what an ADU is and some of the requirements. But for the most part, the vast majority have been able to be approved without major issues, which is a good sign that our rules are generally working well. And then factoring in construction timing, it's likely that 12 or so of those ADUs will be completed in 2024. So with that, I want to talk through a little bit of the grace period for existing ADUs. So to give some background, one of the specific policy goals of the original ordinance passed in 2022 was to create a process for legalizing existing dwellings, which might be an ADU, and it established a grace period which expires in August of this year, so we're getting pretty close. And the grace period was where property owners that think they might have an ADU could submit information to the city. We do research as well and ultimately determine whether an ADU was already approved in some capacity, or we do a follow-up courtesy building inspection to see what might be done to make it into an ADU. And then after the grace period ends, all unapproved or unpermitted ADUs, as the code reads, shall be subject to enforcement as provided by law. That could be code enforcement citations, could be requirements to get building permits, and it could require those spaces to be upgraded to meet current building code requirements. We are overall thinking that the process has gone well. We've received 23 applications so far in about a year and a half. 13 have officially been legalized, so not as quite as high of a proportion as those new ADUs that have been submitted getting approved. 3 are still in the process of review, and then for the 7 remaining applications out of that 23, the owners elected not to move forward with the process. Most of those did receive an inspection, and it was basically determined that either they'd have to make a lot of upgrades or perform some more substantial corrections or connect to water and sanitation. We've had some ADUs that did not have plumbing, but so that's a pretty big upgrade. But those inspections caught that, and that's good. And then some of those 7 indicated that they might be interested in obtaining permits in the future. So again, even though not 100% have gotten legalized, that process is going pretty well. The end of the grace period would mean that a person with a potential existing ADU would have to apply for a new ADU permit. And that's when you have to meet new building codes, that's when you have to meet current zoning code requirements, and potentially make costly upgrades to the building. Existing ADUs right now are generally able to avoid those type of upgrades as long as they can pass a basic life safety inspection. Or we've determined that they were already legally non-conforming, which means we had previously recognized it as an ADU prior to 2022. So staff is recommending to potentially extend the grace period to a later date. We believe there are additional ADUs out there that could benefit from receiving legal ADU status, and owners just haven't applied or may not even be aware of the program. We don't have the capacity to do research on every property in the city and reach out, and that might also be perceived as invasive. But allowing owners to come forward on their own time and not taking a punitive approach has been really overall successful. And owners have been willing to work with the city, build relationships with staff where previously it was a much more tenuous relationship where there was always kind of the over threat of code enforcement or having to get building permits, things like that. And we believe that without an extended grace period, owners are less likely to come forward. If council reaches consensus to extend the grace period, we would anticipate that it would not apply to unpermitted ADUs that were completed after approval of the ADU ordinance. It would only apply to structures in existence prior to 2022, August of 2022. Because anything after that, a new ADU should have obtained the proper permits. So we would only apply it to any ADU that was clearly in existence prior to August 15th, 2022, demonstrated through permit records, real estate transactions, or some other communication. And then that ensures that many of the existing ADUs, which may have been completed decades ago, can still get legalized. We also feel that there is the need for additional public education around the grace period. 23 applications is a reasonable amount, but there's likely a lot more out there. And people need to be aware of the additional opportunities to legalize existing ADUs on their property. So as part of our recommendation, staff would develop an outreach plan, but we would also seek council's help, either through some of your district meetings or other communication you have with your constituents, to reach out about the opportunity to get ADUs legalized. There really has not been a downside so far. People are aware of what they have or what they don't have and have made educated decisions. So I'll pause there and we can go ahead and get this topic out of the way. But we are recommending extending the grace period 2 more years to August of 2026 and want to know if there's consensus to move forward. Thanks.
Okay, questions from council? Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a real, extending for 2 more years. The initial grace period is 2 years and extended for 2 more years. I would think by then people would have the message. Can we maybe include something that says we're not going to extend the grace period again?
I don't know if I can speak to that because I think one of our original thoughts was maybe we just do it indefinitely, and if people have something, they can always come forward. And we wanted to put an end date onto it, but still providing flexibility. So I think that's maybe something we could talk about, but we hadn't explored never extending it again. I guess that's my response to that.
Councilor Ohm.
Thank you. Thank you for the suggestions, Scott. A couple things. I think I want to look at the reason why are we extending it, and I would probably think that the reason is because people are not aware, and why are they not aware, and that simply extending it is not going to solve the RIP problem. And I agree. I don't think we should. We don't have the money. We can't invade people's privacy by asking each individual one. But I guess I would kind of circle back and how have we gotten the notice out to people that have ADUs? But I can't say I'm in favor of extending it another 2 years. I'm not sure that it's going to help much in the end. And I think there needs to be an equal, if we are going to extend it, I think there needs to be something equal to the people that did come forth and made theirs compliant, with the understanding that they only had 2 years to get it done. Now the next group says, well, Wheat Ridge is maybe a little soft, and I can kind of keep waiting and whether or not I do it. But I do feel like we need to be doing something proactive to get people to convert it. And my question is, do they know about it? What have we done to campaign? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Weaver. Oh,
I don't have a question. I would just say that I actually feel very opposite to Councilor Ohm. I think if we had 23 more in 2 years, I think that's winning. And I think it's encouraging people. Whether or not we keep extending it, I think that's another conversation, to the point of what was just said. But I actually think the leniency is creating exactly what Mr. Cutler was explaining, is that people are coming in and asking questions, and I didn't mean to respond with laughter that some places were being rented without plumbing, but like I bought a place that still had outhouses, so so I shouldn't laugh, but I think having a more friendly attitude about it is really seems like the way to go. I would support that. And I certainly don't think we should get punitive towards it yet. That's my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Hobby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with Councilwoman Weaver. One of the things that I think we need to keep in consideration is that some of these properties that have the ADUs, they may not have the finances to be able to upgrade it. They may sell that property, and the people who buy it may be interested in bringing it up to compliance, and or it may be something where later on down the road they're able to get some sort of loan or whatever to do that. So I'm in favor of extending it. I'm not in favor of saying this is it, this is the end. I'd like to see what happens in the next couple of years. Our end goal is to make sure that we have safe living conditions in our community and to bring people's properties into compliance. So I'm in support of extending it, and would also like to mention that ADUs are expensive to build from scratch anyways, and so I'm not surprised that we have a pretty low number of permits for the new ADUs. The ones that are already there, I would like to get those in compliance though.
Thank you, Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. I'm going to mostly just agree with what Councilor Hoppe just said. We had a couple of goals when we were working on this. One was really supporting the compliance of existing, and that is also part of our affordable housing strategy, is that we have existing affordable housing, and we want to bring it up to livable standards and really encourage as many opportunities. So I will actually say I was not expecting us to have as many new ones as we did. I think Arvada, when we did the first report, they had single digits. So I just want to call this policy out as extraordinarily successful. And I'm very supportive of the 2-year extension. I would be really hesitant to support any cap after 2 years. I think one of the things we do well in this council is come back and reevaluate things. But I want to lean towards, we want as many properties to be in compliance in the city as possible, and we want to be good partners with our existing residents and homeowners to get there. And to Councilor Hoppe's point, if a home turns over and it creates an opportunity for compliance, I think, we don't want to discourage that, because this is about affordable housing and compliance. So I am supportive of the extension and would not like to put any limits on it.
Thank you.
And I just want to celebrate, we did a good policy. I think the numbers in here are really encouraging for a city of our size, because Arvada is twice our size and only had like 9, I think. So I think people are really leaning into the policy, and I just want to recognize, I think we did a good job with it.
Thank you. Counselor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I am generally in support of this because of a lot of what has already been mentioned. I am a little concerned that, the 6 that didn't move forward because of, maybe it is finances, but how likely do you think that they will be to come into compliance? And how many more are you looking at, anticipating needing to come into compliance? And do you think that this grace period will allow for that? And I recognize that we may not have the bandwidth to reach out to them directly, nor do we want to be that invasive, particularly with those folks that we had already kind of had a tense relationship with. And so the goal is to bring them into the fold, but what kind of outreach and how many people and how many properties are we looking at?
That's a really good question. I don't think we know how many other potential ADUs are out there. We know there are more. We heard people kind of hint that they have something they're interested in and they just haven't applied. I think for those 6 or 7 that are still in our process, it really is a case-by-case basis. I think the building inspectors, this is a major life safety issue and you will have to pull a building permit to get upgrades. And some are easy and they just, might do it eventually, but everyone's life situation is different. So I think some people are more motivated than others. And so that's why we've seen 13 move forward and say, yeah, this is an easy process. We can add a smoke detector. A lot of it's as simple as that, or add an address on the outside. And then some is this could never be an ADU because the ceiling is too low, or it was dug out, and there's just such a wide range of quality. It's really depends case by case.
The side effect that we couldn't capture quite as well in here that has also applied to some of those that didn't proceed is that because we now allow ADUs, we also have an easier time allowing additional living space. So you can have 2 kitchens, because what used to sort of look like a duck, quack like a duck, we used to say that looks too much like an ADU, it needs to go away. So a lot of folks are realizing, I can keep that living space. I don't need to take it out. We used to go in and say you need to remove the gas connection because you can't have anything that looks like it could potentially be a cooking facility. And that's worked, again, case by case, depending on sort of each person's situation. If they really want it to have a separate address or separate utilities, then they're going to have to eventually figure out how to make it an official ADU. But the added flexibility of more living space or kitchenettes or second kitchens, I think has been really well received. And for folks who are balancing finance versus just I have more space, it's given folks more options, I think.
I can give a really specific example. We had someone apply under the existing ADU, and they had a basement that had a second kitchen, but it was fully connected to the house. There was no separate entrance. And in our mind, that's just, you've got a cool bonus room in the basement. And it's really hard to convert that type of space into an official ADU that's a separate apartment, no common connection. And so we told them that, and they said, okay, great, we're not likely to move forward because that's a really costly upgrade. But we're, in the past, we'd say, but now you've got to remove that kitchen. And now we can say, great, you've got a bonus space in your house, but it's not an ADU, but it's an extra living space that you can use under the main house.
And so those properties that do have significant life safety issues, how do you address or proceed with them, to move forward and to ensure that people are safe and potentially not living there? And
Yeah, there's a building inspection and all those are documented. So the homeowner is aware of, maybe they don't have a smoke detector, carbon monoxide. I'm trying to think of other examples. Egress has been one. Yeah, electrical issues of really old plugs, or I don't know, I'm struggling a little bit, but.
Yeah, the bar's been pretty low to legalize the existing ones. That separate entrance has been a big one. And so we itemized just written summary. If you'd like to proceed to become an official ADU, here's your checklist. You can come in for a permit. And if not, that's totally fine too. And so it's taken us a little bit of time to sort of calibrate our inspections to, I think there was a lot of fear too of are we going to look at everything in the house? Or are we really just going to look to try to get this ADU to become sanctioned? So I would say we've had the time to build the trust and some good case studies where if neighbors are talking to neighbors, they can be like, it's okay. They're going to give you a good, clear to-do list if you want to proceed forward. And we'd love the extra time to sort of bring more people into the mix now that folks have learned what that looks like.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had some of the same questions that Councilor Dozman did, but if we extend this out, what other outreach, I guess, are you planning? What's the next step?
Yeah, I think two things. Sort of all of our contemporary methods. I think ADUs were really still a little bit contentious when we passed this, and we had some opposition to that, so we didn't do sort of this full court press celebration. To your point, we have some good numbers to celebrate, and I think we have a moment with the changes in state law to sort of have a second wave of potential awareness that it's not possibly going to change because it didn't work for us. So we're hoping to capitalize a little bit on that momentum and messaging.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, and I agree with Councilor Hoppy and Councilor Hulteen on this. I think we need to keep the end goal in mind, and the end goal is that we create housing, and that we, and it was weird because I heard a lot of people when the ADUs, when we initially passed it, were in the pocket of the developer. This is the exact opposite of it. This is not going to Walmart. This is like buying it on Facebook Marketplace, right? Like this is neighbor helping neighbor essentially, right? I mean, so making sure that we have the best quality ADUs is a big part of that too, and making sure that these are livable units and that we're not creating, I guess, low quality housing. So that's really important. So I think we should move forward with the 2-year grace period and get the word out as much as possible. And we can look at extending it beyond that, because the idea is to get as many people in the fold. And I still feel like there's neighbors out there that are saying, oh, that guy still has that in their backyard, and they're still not talking about it. So I still hear whispers of that in conversations. So, the more we can get those people in compliance, and just so that, everybody knows what's out there, I think the better. So I'd like to move forward on that as well. Thank you.
Councilor Weaver.
I just wanted to ask, I do want to clarify that, first of all, I don't have any more outhouses at the farm. They have all been taken down.
They weren't historical structures?
They might have been.
Might have been.
That's a whole nother issue. No, my question is, we do have this fund that we have created for for affordable housing. And I'm just wondering if for some of those places where they are close to compliance, but needing a grant or something like that, that might help them, might funds be available as part of the other funds we created along with the ADU and the short-term rental taxing? So I don't know who that question is. Is that for Patrick? Is that for Lauren? Or is that for?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be an option. We plan to come back, I think, later, probably this year, to talk about how you want to use those funds.
Yeah.
Tonight is going to be specific to inclusionary housing, but
Sure.
That's really up to council and how you want to use
I just
those
think
funds. So,
that maybe having a portion of it,
Yeah.
because we're all in agreement that ADUs are sort of a homegrown way
Yeah.
of offering a space that maybe there's something appropriate for some.
Yeah, and now that the state passed the ADU ordinance, they may adjust some of the Prop 123 funding or other funding specifically for ADUs. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah, but that might be a great way to bring more people to the table too.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you. One last question. So I guess to put this into two different buckets, extension and then from a legal standpoint, if someone is knowingly operating an ADU, but they're not coming forward to make it legal, does that put the city in some type of legal jeopardy that and I don't know how, because I guess, do we know that they have an ADU, but they just haven't decided to make it legal, but they're renting out? So I want to know, what kind of punitive fines is there if somebody's running an illegal ADU? Because like you pointed out, there's the separate electrical service I've heard before about the 1 hour, fire, if it's in the same house, and the egress windows. And so we have a duty as a city for life, safety, welfare. in our charter to protect the citizens. So how do we do that?
So a lot of those requirements for fire separation and electrical upgrades and separate utilities relates to the applicability of the building code on new ADUs. So there are a lot of homes that don't meet current building codes. So that's how we've treated these existing ADUs, is that you don't need to comply with contemporary building codes. We're going to assume this is an existing condition and look at the minimum life safety. Same as like when we do residential remodels, we're not sort of looking, do you have knob and tube in the rest of your house? Again, because you allow extra living space and we allow people to rent out portions of their home, the renting of sort of a not yet actually legal ADU is also still allowed. So there have been upsides to this ordinance, I think, that go beyond the legalizing of ADU. It's essentially sort of legalized living arrangements, become more flexible living arrangements for a lot of people. So from a building code liability standpoint, I don't think we have a specific concern because there's a lot of existing conditions in regular homes and ADUs that are sort of older conditions.
Because I see a lot of existing homes in Wheat Ridge, and so if, we're talking about a 2-year extension, it's like, why even have a deadline? You have so many existing homes, and what is that process of turning over? Like, why have a deadline if you have a house? You could set a criteria. You could say like any house is built before 2010 or something, because as these people come in, they could convert it.
Yeah, I think, and it may be a conversation we can have when we're talking about updating the building codes, but there's a significantly wider range of codes that would apply. Like if you were coming in to do a residential remodel, I think then we choose to have apply when we're legalizing the ADU living space. There are probably communities that lower that bar a little bit, but we haven't contemplated that yet.
Thank you.
Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just my 2 cents on this. I think this is, I would definitely be in support of extending this, the 2-year grace period. I think one of the things that I've heard from many residents just in conversation is what a huge gift this could be to a family who gets to have, an older family member come in and live with them, or other families who, need a place to be as they're moving or transitioning. And I also, it's sounding like perhaps some outreach or education is necessary. And I think that those conversations could be really impactful as well. It almost feels like, some people are maybe afraid to ask questions, or they're afraid to say, oh, I actually do have this extra entrance and I don't want anyone to know about it, or, anything like that. Extra kitchen in my basement. But I do feel like I would be in support of, helping to get the word out if we need to have an education event or something like that. But I do support the extending the 2-year grace period. Thank you.
Thank you. And Counselor Hulteen.
Thank you. I've got a question and a comment. One of the ways non-conforming ADUs hit my radar was after the hailstorm. We all know the one I'm talking about. The one that earned my car the nickname Dimple. Was that a lot of people found out they had non-conforming ADUs when they went to go pull permits. Do we have a system, the city, as in you, the staff, have a system that captures those types of inquiries, like flags them and like notifies them of the opportunity? Like if they come in for a permit and find out at that point that they've got a non-conforming ADU, do we say, hey, there's this program?
We do, and now we do. We didn't, hindsight's 2020. I wish we'd been keeping a log from the last 10 years of the times that came to us. But since the ordinance has been passed, we try to capture people into that program through any venue that we can. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We've talked about this before, but the Gazette doesn't work for our notifications, but maybe we could a couple times a year run a notification in the Gazette about non-conforming. And I think in particular, there's probably 2 demographics that are probably the least aware of this, and they're kind of at the different ends of the age spectrum. And I think, so also using social media a little bit around there, and maybe having someone who went through the program and got got compliance just to tell their story, you know, that this isn't like scary city government coming in to try and tell you what to do, but rather this was a good partnership that had a good outcome. Could be good ways of doing that. And then the other point I just want to make with, I think we're at consent, I think we've got the consensus we need with this, but I mean, my neighbor is one of the ones that has pulled out a permit, and they're actually in framing, and they just, I think, just put the outside siding on it. So I walk by it every day. It's really fun. But they're building it for their daughter who's in college, and she's going to live in it. And they have 2 younger kids. And so she's like earning part of her keep by helping out, like still with her half siblings. You know, and then they're really excited that when she moves on that they can rent it out. So it's been a great story, but like the time it took for them to get those permits and get workmen. So I think that's another reason to extend it, is that it takes time from the first conversation to actually getting towards being able to actually implement and improve if you have to make any investments. So I like time to solve problems, and I think for me this is an easy one. But I agree with Councilmember Ohm. Like if we're going to do it, we've got to, if we're extending for the information opportunity, we've got to be proactive on it. So, thanks.
Counselor Hoppy, did you have something else that wasn't to ask for a consensus? Okay, then that's what I want to do is, so do we have consensus by the, to move forward with the grace period and coordinate a public education program? Looks like we do. Mr. Cutler.
Great. I'll move on to update everyone about the House Bill 241152. So I know a lot of us in the room were following that bill from the start to the end, and the bill actually changed pretty significantly through the course of the legislative session, including some changes recommended by CML and other stakeholders. So the final version of the bill still requires that by June of next year, all jurisdictions of 1,000 or more allow ADUs anywhere that single unit homes are allowed, and that they must be subject to an administrative approval process. And we already have that. So check, great. The bill originally contained some stronger provisions about prohibiting owner occupancy requirements across the board, and those have changed, and I'll go through them. The entire list, and this is actually not even the entire list, is in the memo, but I'll just go over the requirements that pertain to Wheat Ridge that we are recommending changing to comply. Ultimately, it's up to council whether we want to comply with the state legislation or not. But there's 3 I'll talk through today. One is the owner occupancy, another is size requirements, and then the last one is setbacks. Pretty much everything else, Wheat Ridge was already in compliance with the state legislation, and due to CML and others lobbying, owner occupancy requirements have been changed pretty significantly. So like I said, originally it was across the board prohibiting owner occupancy requirements for any ADUs. Now the state's actually changed that to 3 different categories. Owner occupancy requirements are still allowed when related to a short-term rental in an ADU. And that's good because this is already a requirement in Wheat Ridge. So we can continue to enforce those requirements when related to a short-term rental. And at the second agenda item tonight, we'll talk more about that. It will allow owner occupancy to be demonstrated when a property already contains a house and an application is filed to construct or convert an ADU. That word demonstrated is from the state law, and we will have to figure out with state legislation, CML, and our attorney how that may affect our code. We don't think at this point that we would have proof beyond the initial application, so we couldn't enforce a deed restriction, which we do now to make sure that owner occupancy runs with the land, but that's something we'll figure out. And then lastly, it does prohibit owner occupancy requirements and deed restrictions for new ADUs being built simultaneously with a new construction primary dwelling unit. So this is new house and new ADU at the same time in new development. We can't enforce an owner occupancy requirement. So that would require our legislation to be modified. And again, that's a pretty small case. I think out of the, I forget how many, we only have 3 out of all the ADUs that we've approved that were both new house plus new ADU. Usually it's someone living on the property that's building an ADU on a house that's already there. The next one that we're still looking into how it will affect Wheat Ridge is municipalities now have to allow ADUs between 500 and 750 square feet in size. and municipalities can still prohibit larger or smaller. We actually allow up to 1,000 or 50%, whichever is less. We're trying to figure out whether if the house is really tiny, what the maximum size is. So there's still some things to figure out there. But overall, we're generally compliant with that requirement. It's a little confusing, and I'm actually confused just talking about it right now. And when I was writing this, we looked at it like 10 times and still couldn't figure it out. So we need to figure out whether the code, our code is compliant already, or if we need to change it just a little bit. That comes up. There's a lot of houses in East Wheat Ridge that are really small, about 800 square feet. And so right now, the way our code is written, you can only do half of the existing house. But half of the existing house is 400, and now we're required minimum to allow 500. So we're thinking we might be able to increase the size, but still not make the ADU bigger than the main house. So that's kind of our approach, but we need to look into how this actually impacts us. And then the last impact to Wheat Ridge is related to setbacks. Right now, side setbacks have to be the same for an ADU as a primary dwelling unit. That no impact there. But rear setbacks, the state has required that it's the same as other accessory buildings or 5 feet, whichever is less. And in some of our zone districts, including R1, we require up to a 15-foot setback for even accessory buildings. So that's something we need to look at, is how does this impact some of our low-density zone districts? And then also, how does it impact ADUs that are 2 stories? Can you still have a slightly larger setback if the ADU is on top of a garage, for example, or does it always have to be 5? So again, we need to look into that based our recommendations on some future guidance. But overall, those are the only 3 where the state legislation is at odds with our current rules. Everything else, we were compliant. It's almost like we were a model for the state legislation, which is great. Yeah, so with all of that, we do need council's consensus on whether you support us modifying the existing ADU ordinance to comply with state legislation by next June.
Thank you. Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Scott, for example, with the, so we currently say 50% of the primary dwelling or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. Could we say, could we add it if then? So could we say 50% of the primary dwelling or 1,000 feet, whichever is less? If 50% is less than 500 feet, then you can have 500 feet. Do it. You can do it like
Great. I tried so long to think of that. I couldn't think of it.
The clarity.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And then my question to the setback. So our R1 zone district requirement setbacks of 15 feet is not, as I understand, we changed that for sheds and storage, right? So could we potentially look at how we looked at sheds? So this, we're looking at a case of detached versus attached, because if it's on a garage, it's considered attached. And if it's not, then it's considered detached. So I think maybe we should look at how does the state consider the detached versus attached? And because if it's detached, then would it be 5 feet? And if it's attached, could we still require the 15 feet? Because we don't necessarily want a garage on 5 feet, right, of the rear setback. But so I think maybe if we can look at, like, does that bring us into compliance with the state? And then my last question is, so with the owner occupancy, let's say for all of these ADUs that we have that they're coming in, current, existing, non-compliant ADUs, illegal non-compliant ADUs, the owner occupancy requirements, according to what the state has done, says that we cannot have an owner occupancy requirement for those. The only thing we can have an owner occupancy requirement for is, like you said, the new, both built new. Is that right?
It's the other way.
Opposite. So we can require owner occupancy for existing ADUs. We cannot require, okay, for the new news. Okay.
And I'm not totally sure, because this legislation applies to new ADUs. And my understanding is it's silent to how we would handle existing ADUs.
Okay.
That's something we would need to seek clarity on as well, because we want to see if that second bullet point would apply to existing as well.
I know that it was really important for the majority of our community that we had an owner occupancy requirement. I also know that it's not best practice. And I don't feel like that temperature has changed much in our community. So here's how I sit with these come into compliance. I'm totally fine with the 50%, 500 feet to 1,000 feet. But I feel like I need more information on the attached versus detached kind of, and I need more kind of information on how does it actually speak to existing non-compliant ADUs. Before I can give like actual, like clear consensus to move forward with these, I feel like I just need a little bit more information other than the 500 feet. I'm good with that one. But what happens, I thought we legally had to come into compliance with state legislation. Is there a way that we don't have to?
If our city attorney wasn't sitting behind me, I would say, I don't think you have to at the risk of being sued. I think our intent in asking this was to say, are you okay if we track the progress, likely through rulemaking and sort of some clarification, and then we would likely come back in a study session with the proposed ordinance to say, here's what we now know. Here's what an ordinance could look like that would bring us into compliance with state law. I imagine there are some councils that are like, heck no, don't bother complying. So before we spend the effort on what could be some effort, because I think there's a lack of clarity among a lot of cities, we just wanted to make sure we had the green light to generally proceed towards compliance and present an ordinance to you that would be more compliant.
Okay.
And we have a year as well, which is helpful.
Gotcha. So a consensus to move forward toward looking towards state compliance does not mean we're moving forward to state compliance. It means you guys have your marching orders to track it and just keep going. Then I am a yes on all that.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. So on the setbacks, I'm okay with the other stuff, but on the setbacks, so it's a 15-foot, or we currently have a 15-foot setback on the R1. What is it for R2? Is that
It's 5.
5 feet?
So all of our other zones are 5. This would likely only impact R1 or a 2-story ADU. But
Yeah.
only in certain zone districts. So it's like a kind of a tier. R1, it impacts everything.
So could you, because right now, could you have a garage, say in an R2, 2-story garage and an ADU on top, 5 feet from the property line? Detached from the main house?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think
Okay.
maybe.
I think people would have a lot of issue with that.
But if we already allow it.
What's that?
We already allow in every zone district except for R1.
A 2-story structure within 5 feet? Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Weaver.
I just had a question. So with the state ruling, does that and it impacting, how does it, okay, sorry. Let's see if I can ask this question. Because I'm reading ahead to the short-term rental stuff. How does this affect the rules with someone having because the whole idea, my understanding, is for affordable housing and longer leases in these ADUs. But what stops people from turning these ADUs into short-term rental and sort of superseding the whole purpose of why there was a state law in the first place? And I was just curious if that's, and if we're going to talk about that another time, or when we talk about, I was just kind of curious.
I can speak to that a little bit. So we already have an owner occupancy requirement for all ADUs. They've got to be owner occupied. That actually takes out a pretty big portion of people that don't want to be there, and we can talk to how that's enforced with the second agenda item. But the state legislation doesn't change that. There was written exactly the same as ours. So you'd still have to get a license. You'd have to live on the property. It's no different.
Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just because I'm dense, one more time. does home rule charter apply here so we don't have to be in compliance with the state? And I know Jerry's sitting over there.
Then now I'll defer to the city attorney.
I think they included a statewide concern in this legislation, which means it does override our home rule
It does.
authority, but
Okay.
Legislature does that, you know, they included a declaration of statewide concern. And until the court, you know, until somebody challenges that, that's just the legislature saying, we think this is statewide, but that doesn't mean it isn't local. And you can, as a home rule city, you can write your own rule. It just means the legislature thinks that you can't, and until somebody litigates it, and it's often the case that the legislature enacted the requirement of employees living, you know, in the municipality and said it was statewide concern and lost that one because the court said, no, fundamentally, that's a local issue. So the question will be is, you know, encouraging affordable housing through ADUs a truly local concern? Is it mixed or is it statewide? And the jury is not even out there yet for that before they're even coming back. So I fully expect in the next year that one of two things will happen. Either we'll get some litigation going, some other city will play the Article 20 card early, or the legislature will make some changes, getting some pushback, or CML will weigh in and see if they can make that happen. All that translates, in my opinion, to saying that what you've got going, which is staff, pursue this and start working up the compliance, because in some cases the compliance would be fine or maybe not that hard for us. Start working on this, and let's watch how developments take place both with the legislature and the courts before we finally make a change in a year. I think that's a really good strategy myself.
Thank you.
Yep.
Given that's the advice of our lawyer, can I ask for consensus that we move forward?
Not yet,
No,
please.
okay.
I had a couple of questions myself, actually. Scott, how do you currently enforce the owner occupancy requirement now?
For any ADU, new or existing, at some point before we can either issue the permit for new or give them a certificate of ADU approval for the existing, they have to sign a deed restriction, which will be recorded at Jefferson County, runs with the property. And it says that one of the units on the property has to be owner occupied. It doesn't specify which, and then it just runs with the land. Beyond that, it's not really feasible to enforce it.
So because that's a pretty arcane system to be able to try to track that,
It runs with the land, it would show up on title, but beyond that.
but only if it was sold.
Right, true. There's just no practical way without substantial staff resources to track this. Even with the small amount of ADUs we have, it would be impossible.
Would it be possible as you permit an ADU to develop a sort of a registration, maybe a biannual registration with a nominal fee, and maybe an attestation that the owner lived in one of the units? So at least you've got a record of what's out there on a contemporary basis?
I mean, theoretically, we developed that kind of program for group homes a number of years ago. We haven't done a registration program like for rental properties or anything else, but
Right.
yes, theoretically, that could be a process.
Okay. Any other discussion on this one? Do we have consensus to direct staff to sort of move forward to bring recommendations on complying with state statute? Looks like we do. Okay, Mr. Cutler.
And the last part of the legislation is related to ADU supportive jurisdiction. And so this is an interesting concept, and we've seen it more with some state bills that have come out recently, where communities can become these supportive jurisdictions of various causes by submitting a form and then stating how they comply with all the provisions of the House bill. And then it makes them eligible for a lot of funding. So instead of a hammer, it's like an encouragement to get cities to comply with the state legislation. They listed several strategies in the bill of how a community could become supportive jurisdiction, and how we would have to submit something to the state says how we implement one or more of the following strategies. So I'm not going to read all of the different strategies, but benefits of becoming an ADU supportive jurisdiction are that we become eligible for state funding for ADU programs, which could go towards permit fee reductions for lower income households building ADUs, for deed restricted affordable ADUs, and for ADA accessible ADUs, among other types. It can provide technical assistance for people developing ADU plans, and can help cities develop pre-approved ADU plans. Right now, there's $5 million allocated, and then future, it's subject to annual appropriations. With many competitive grant processes, the minimum might be the implementation of one strategy, but a greater number of strategies actually make the city more competitive on grant applications. So we reviewed all of the different strategies, and we sorted them into 3 categories. So the first 3 we're kind of already doing, not fully. We have fully implemented a program regulating the use of ADUs as short-term rentals. We do assist property owners to ensure pre-existing ADUs comply with not all building codes, but local laws, and that they're getting into compliance and essentially registering as an existing ADU. And we do provide some education and technical assistance to homeowners, although it's not a formal program. The middle strategies, we weren't really sure they were a good fit for Wheat Ridge, but we still want to track the same way we were going to do with the state legislation to see how it might impact Wheat Ridge and better understand those requirements. And then the last 2 provide pre-approved plans for the construction of ADUs and enacting laws that encourage prefabricated ADUs. This is something that we were actually really interested in exploring those strategies further. Pre-approved plans and prefabricated ADUs often save costs for applicants and also time for staff. It's something a lot of communities have already implemented successfully across Colorado and nationwide. And pre-approved plans, including prefab ADUs, have really been used successfully to make the process more predictable. Some communities have even held, I'm not suggesting we do this necessarily, design competitions to have, what 2 types of ADUs are really special to the community. And those cities have seen increased applications to build those ADUs because essentially you apply and get the ADU approved right away. So we are interested in exploring those strategies. Obviously, we still have to see how state legislation shakes out over the next year, but we do want to still look into those strategies to implement potentially, as well as any others that council may be interested in. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the kind of skipping past the D, E, and F. I think that for budget reasons also, and then, but I do think that I don't know why we wouldn't allow prefabricated. There are the apartment complex on the corner of Reed and 38th Avenue had prefabricated walls that came in on a truck and went up. They didn't build them on site. So I think prefabricated is really the way to go. Not only does it bring down less waste in the building process, but then it's made right, and also it will save staff time, which then also saves us money. So I do support staff exploring strategies H and I.
Thank you, Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you. Yeah, my neighbors, actually, the said neighbors I talked about, they're actually doing a prefab unit. So I would like us also to consider F. One of the reasons we've cited a lot throughout this ADU development was intergenerational supportive living. And sometimes that is a child with special needs or an aging adult. And so I think encouraging ADA accessible and visitable ADUs would actually align with our ADU policy intentions. So I'd like to add F to the list.
Thank you, Councilor Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I really like I as well with the prefabrication, especially if we do a design contest. That sounds fun. But all of the bathrooms at the new Lutheran Hospital were prefabricated and brought in on a crane and dropped in prior to all of the walls being built around it. And it saves a lot of time, a lot of money. And I think that that would be a very affordable option for families that are looking to bring ADUs onto their property. And so I'm really in support of H and I. I would need a little bit more information on E and F, what those laws might look like to incentivize, and if we can maybe leverage the funds with the affordable housing strategy and incentivize as opposed to require. I could be motivated to support something of that nature, but it's been kind of mentioned throughout this conversation that like this really is a policy win for Wheat Ridge. I mean, I think not only accessory dwelling units, but short-term rentals, we had continued to kick the can down the road for a really long time and failed to regulate this in an effective way. And now I feel like we really are the flagship, for the framework of some of these programs, and we're doing it well. We're listening to the community, and I really appreciate staff's just work on all of this, and continuing to revisit it and see the ways in which we need to adapt and kind of review lessons learned, and how to make the policy even better. So I just wanted to say that before the conversation concludes. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. The way that this is broken down and the ones that are okay, the ones that there's some questions about, and then H and I, the two final ones. I have a question on H, and then I have a comment on I. The question on H is a pre-approved plan for construction. Just clarify what pre-approved means.
So it's pre-approved building drawings, which means it's pre-engineered, pre-plumbing, all that stuff is already approved. It doesn't mean pre-approved site plan, so staff would still need to evaluate where on the property it's going, if there's any drainage impacts. So we would still ask for a site plan. It could be a sketch plan that shows where it's located and what the setbacks are, but the expensive stuff, which is the engineering and the plumbing and electrical, is already approved under the building code. So someone could just submit the same plan for any site, as long as the site plan, they can scale it and it works with the setbacks.
It often can mean that the homeowner doesn't have to hire the architect, and we'll have like a couple different facade or exterior material options. We do this a lot for bigger residential projects. Like we'll approve 4 master plans, for like a new development. And then when the 20 permits come in later, we've already approved the 4 masters. So it saves everybody some time.
So it certainly would save time, and it would save the homeowner some expense. The architects might not be that happy. But my comment is on I and prefabricated, probably because to me prefabricated can mean anything from a park model RV to a shipping container. And I can't imagine a neighbor's going to want somebody to plop a shipping container right next door to their house within 5 feet. So a little more clarification on what prefabricated is and is not, I think would help. Once we get to that point, then I believe I could probably support the idea of prefabricated if we know what that means. Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. One question I have is on it talks about regulating the use of ADUs as STRs, or STRs. I guess the ADU, would that conversion mean detached or attached or both?
I don't believe this specifies, at least the state rules don't specify.
Okay, and then the other question I have is on I can't say I'm very much in favor of enabling a pathway for the separate sale of ADUs. I think that would be very cumbersome. But my last comment is just that, no matter what happens, I just hope that we can, strike a balance with the community. I'd hate to see, where the communities are, I've seen other communities around the United States where we just have blocks of, there's one, maybe two owners on the whole block, and the rest is all just ADUs, STRs, people coming and going, and they don't really know each other. And so then the community comes back, and then they're trying to revise something to kind of circle back to like, well, what makes our community? So just trying to find a balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm definitely in support of H&I. I think those make plenty of sense. We already do prefab plans. I was just going to say that before. But D and G, I think, would be hard nose for me. But I could definitely be persuaded into E and F pretty easily, just based on kind of where we're going with our discussions. And I think our community needs and wants. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think there's a few more people that raise their hand after me, though. Thank you.
Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you. So how many of these strategies do you have to implement to be considered a supportive jurisdiction?
So it's a twofold. You have to comply with all the provisions of the House bill and one of these strategies.
So we would have to comply with what we had just talked about. We'd have to comply with the setbacks and with the owner occupancy piece.
Correct. And then
one strategy.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And what I hear staff saying is A, B, and C, we're pretty much already in compliance there, maybe a few tweaks, but in general, staying the same. You feel that H and I are good places for us to take a look at, which is providing pre-approved plans and enacting laws that encourage prefabricated ADUs. And then I hear my fellow council people saying that they would be supportive incentivizing construction and conversion of ADA accessible and affordability to build ADUs. And in the memo, some of the ways that you discussed about doing that is like potential building permits and stuff like that. However, that does affect our budget. So I could get to a place of support for E and F. I could definitely support F. But I feel like I would need a little more information on how, if we're going to take that money out of our budget, which we already know that when we approved our budget, we were going to do that. Ooh, if we're doing better than we thought we would, we're going to be adding things back in. So we already approved a cut budget, basically. So I would really hate to be taking more funds out of an already cut budget to have to cut it again. So if there were other places that we could find it other than building codes, or if we feel like when we're, budget season's coming soon again, if we feel like it's always budget season. So if we feel like while we're looking at the budget for this budget season, maybe we could say, okay, we could afford up to a certain amount or something like that, then I would be totally happy with that. But where I'm sitting is I think we bring E and F back once we start looking at our budget in budget season. We move forward with H and I, and then if we do decide that, also we're looking like down the road within the next year on if we're going to comply in fully with the state. And then at some point we come back and say, okay, we're going to comply fully with the state. And then we have these other things that we're doing. And then we can decide if we're going to be a supportive jurisdiction. But that's where I'm at.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. I want to follow up on Councilor Larson. On providing the pre-approved plans, is that, what sort of liability do you think we accrue in that? I mean, will we be doing the soils investigation, foundation design? Or is this?
We have not investigated this at all. We think it would make a lot of sense. Like Scott said, there's still some things that would require property-specific, either engineering or site planning. But it gives the applicant the building envelope plan set, so they don't have to hire the architect. If one of our pre-approved plans is a stamped architectural plan that architect wants to withdraw, then they
So
can
this is
do
sort of
that.
like a standard, 8 by 12 or whatever, that size
Whatever
is
this-
with,
Yeah,
4 walls and a roof and a foundation by others. And we wouldn't be stamping those with a PE or a licensed engineer.
we'd have to put some more thought into the program if
Okay.
it's something that you'd want us
Okay.
to move forward with. Yeah,
We should just keep those things in mind, I
Sure.
think.
yeah. Yeah, it's not a over-the-counter permit. It's just that often it would mean the homeowner doesn't have to spend the 6 months and tens of thousands of dollars to get just the plan set to walk in the door.
Yeah.
But it doesn't-
Or, if there's or a way to kind of, do most of it, but,
Yeah,
You know.
it doesn't shortcut the permit requirements. It just shortcuts the plan preparation process a little bit.
okay.
Yeah.
Do we have, let's see, well, we had a number of things that we wanted to look at consensus for. So it sounded like maybe E and F and H and I. Would we have consensus to move forward on investigating those? Looks like we do. Okay. Good.
That's all I've got.
That's,
Yeah.
no more next steps, okay?
Yeah, just real quick, and it said in the memo, but we'll be back sooner than later to extend the grace period before that runs out, and then everything else will take us a bit more time.
Okay.
So it'll be a multi-phase. Yeah, thank
So we'll-
you.
So we'll be looking at another discussion to come back on this. Okay. Thank you very much. Nice, good presentation. With that, we're going to go to agenda item number 2. This is a short-term rental code compliance update. Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are getting our presentation materials ready here. Once you coming to the table too, Ally? Okay. All right, take your time.
Here.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Talk amongst yourselves. I'm Allie.
So as she's pulling up, so another update on another ordinance, as you mentioned, several of you mentioned that I think Ms. Dozman said, she appreciates us bringing these back and making adjustments. One adjustment that we're bringing forward this evening, or a recommendation, came from Councilmember Ohm to look at SDR short-term rentals in our mixed-use zone districts. But we're also here to give an update, just in general, as we did with ADUs, on where we are and how the implementation has been going. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex Shuck.
Thank you. I'm just going to start very quickly. Mayor, Council, thank you so much for having us here this evening. Before we get started, I'd just like to do some quick introductions about some folks that we've been talking about. Most of you know Mark Colvin. Mark's our finance manager. So for most of you, this is a reintroduction. You'll hear from Mark pretty soon here regarding the 2023 financial audit in the next month or so. But I think for maybe Councillor Snell and Lawson, this might be a new face for you both. Mark's been here for about 6.5 years, and so he leads the revenue teams, which work on tax and licensing, and accounting and payroll, and works with Chris Miller really closely, and we're super lucky to have Mark. But also in the room with us, I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Monty. If you want to stand and wave. Rachel is our revenue supervisor. So Rachel oversees the tax and licensing team and is working really closely with Mark right now on implementing the new tax and licensing software that you asked us to get marching on. So that's all in the works. So thanks for being here, Rachel. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Leo Lopez. We've been talking about Leo. Leo is our compliance officer. So we talked about Leo, we just didn't know his name yet during the budget. When we took a vacancy, we partnered up with the police department, if you remember, and said, gosh, we're just having so many code compliance issues with these new licensing programs, and it's so different from the work of our regular community services officers. So Leo is the unicorn that we were looking for. When we wrote the job description, we weren't sure this person existed, and he does, and his name is Leo Lopez. So Rachel and Leo are also here for questions this evening from both of you. And one thing I just wanted to share about Leo is that he started with us on about, I think, early December, right? And the time Leo started, I mean, short-term rentals have definitely been, I think your phones were pretty busy with STRs. Some were more challenging than other sort of more simple issues. Some were pretty challenging. But we were definitely hearing through you all, usually to Patrick, about some pretty challenging situations going on in the neighborhoods. So Leo honed in on STRs really, really quickly. And he estimates that we had about a 66% compliance rate when he started, meaning of all the listings that are the system we use, the AI was aggregating of all the marketplace facilitators, about 66% were compliant listings. And he thinks that that number is now in the 88% range. So that's really good. Right? Yeah, good. But it's now really hard. You know, he's been working through and convincing people to get into compliance, and but now we're pretty much maxed out. We've hit the cap, and these getting us to full compliance. We're still hearing from some neighbors, is getting more and more challenging. So as City Manager Mr. Goff mentioned, thank you to Councilor Ohm who brought up a particular issue. Scott's also at the table with us this evening because he's been working on sort of this townhome situation and can be here to help answer questions on that. But additionally, we have Leo's been really, and Rachel have been working really hard on this, and we have some additional recommendations for you. So that's just a little bit of the context. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Colvin, who's going to walk us through a brief presentation.
Once again, good evening, and thank you for receiving this staff memo a few weeks ago and reading it. I realize, having helped write it, that there's a lot there. So thank you for taking the time to look it over. And Councilor Alm, thank you for bringing up the issue before that gave us a good reason to piggyback off of that and bring some other things that we'd like for council to consider. So. This evening, we're going to briefly discuss the landscape of short-term rentals in Wheat Ridge, followed by a short discussion of each topic that staff deems appropriate to bring to your attention. These include townhomes in mixed-use zone districts, the townhome loophole, marketplace facilitators, annual cap reporting, STR host definition alignment, and the enactment of a fine schedule. This next slide shows a bit of history. So we're in our fourth cycle since many on this council helped enact. The next slide depicts where we are currently by type of whole home or partial home license and by district, and how many total licenses there are. The next slide is the first issue, and it is the town home loophole. And I really appreciate Scott helping us with the writing this into the memo, as this comes from his area of expertise, the zoning code. And we learned that there were some licenses being issued, but they weren't counting toward the cap, to Councilor Ohm's suspicions. So we hope that this has a good outcome. Our recommendation would be to amend code section 26645, which is not our code, to close the townhome loophole so that townhomes in all zone districts are included in the district whole home cap. The next subject that we wanted, well, there's 4 additional subjects we wanted to piggyback off of Councilor Ohm's recommendation from earlier this year. The first one is a challenging one, and it's the marketplace facilitator. Marketplace facilitator, as is defined in our code in chapter 22, is a person who contracts with a marketplace seller or multi-channel seller to facilitate for consideration, regardless of whether or not the consideration is deducted as fees from the transaction, the sale of the marketplace seller's tangible personal property, products, or services through the person's marketplace. Think Airbnb, think VRBO, think Expedia, think eBay, think Amazon.
I mean, it's the majority, right, of the STRs are coming through marketplace facilitators.
I would agree with that, Ally, thank you. I would dare say that more than 80% are coming through Airbnb alone, if not 90%, the bulk. So from the very beginning, we struggled with the marketplace facilitators, and it was actually 9 months after we adopted the short-term rental the reporting date was required, that Airbnb finally came clean and started remitting to us. And they're consistent, and they licensed up, and we have some relationship with Airbnb, but we still don't have full cooperation with them or other marketplace facilitators. It's just been a tug and a pull to get them to work with Leo, to work with me, Leo's predecessors, to give us the simplest of information. As Ally mentioned earlier, there's this artificial intelligence that farms the internet every night, most every night, right, Rachel? And tells us what they believe are listings that might not be licensed. But that's as far as they'll go. They're not required to, at this time, to put the licensee's license number. They are required by our code, but currently they're not doing it. Okay, because they're not required to do it because they're not the licensee. So this is one of our challenges that we've had, is to try to gain information from them that they're not willing to give us, to help us do our jobs, to enforce, to keep the caps straight, to just keep the community happy, just to do our work that this council and this code has asked us to do. So we have given considerable thought to this challenging area of marketplace facilitators and how we might improve our code to help us do our jobs. We talked with our neighbors. Leo even went and rode around with the guys from Denver one day, right after he started, to find out what they do. I've talked with a representative at CML. Rachel and I are part of a task force for lodging tax, and we hear stories far and wide about what every one of our neighbors and other home rule cities in the state are challenged with in this particular area. And while we think we've got in this recommendation what we need, we're sure that it's an ever-changing landscape, that things may change. So I'll say that up front. But our recommendation, as it relates to enhancing our code to address the marketplace facilitators issue, is that we require marketplace facilitators to regulate advertisements to show the license type, whether it's whole home or partial home. Currently, they're not required to do that. The marketplace facilitators. Licensees are, but they're not. Part of that recommendation is also to require marketplace facilitators to provide the following essential compliance information upon request: financial and tax information. And this is going to, as you read this, you probably thought this is very straightforward. Why don't they just give it to us? Well, they don't. They feel like it's proprietary. So this is very basic information that will help me and my team do our jobs better and to be better stewards of what you've asked us to be. Financial and tax information: name of the person or persons who offered the STR, dates for which the STR property was booked by a guest, the price paid by the guest of each STR transaction, and the STR license number of any property advertising on any marketplace facilitator platform. The final part of this recommendation for marketplace facilitators is to assess a penalty of $1,000 per day per violation for marketplace facilitators that do not comply with a records request or allow unlicensed STR property owners to advertise on their platform. Denver and Aurora did this, and according to our sources, it stopped really quick once they put it in their code. The next topic is cap cap calculation, and this is pretty straightforward. Because of the time of when we enacted our code and we rolled it out, it had a start date of November 1st for the zoning area. And so it's really cumbersome at that time of year to try to pull together stats so we can calculate the cap limits. So we'd like to sort of align this calendar with all of our other calendars and make it a calendar. So that goes from
Calendar one more time.
calendar. January 1 through December 31st. It's just basically aligning with our other calendars. Is that well said? The next subject that was in the memo that we would like for this council to consider approving is the alignment of the definition of host between Chapter 11 and Chapter 26. We did it last fall with Chapter 11. We should have done it with Chapter 26. So our recommendation is to update Code Section 26-123 of a short-term rental host to match Chapter 11, which says it includes anybody hired by a short-term rental licensee, the owner, to operate their short-term rental within the city of Wheat Ridge. So it's just alignment of the wording between the two chapters. And finally, we don't need the code changed for this, but we'd like for council's permission or for council to authorize a fine schedule. Fine schedules, correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry or Ally, but or Patrick, fine schedules are not codified. They're part of the annual budget process. And so we currently don't have a fine schedule for Leo to go out there to Dover Street and issue a fine. But we'd like to have a fine schedule. And so we have presented in the staff memo a list of first, second, third, fourth, and fifth time violations, NOVs, notice of violations. And so our recommendation is to mirror the police force code enforcement fine schedule in the Administrative Services Department so that Leo has similar tools at his disposal to bring non-compliant STRs into compliance as in other areas of the code. So it's just asking for your authorization to start using a fine schedule to give us the teeth that we need to bring about correction and compliance. So those are the topics we have brought to your attention. And so now we have the recommendations again here in our final slide. Would you like for me to read them one more time or?
I don't think so, Mayor and Council. I think the goal here, thank you so much, Mark, was just if we just kind of leave that up on the screen for you. And they're also the back of the staff memo. Hopefully we can just work through them one by one. And again, thanks to Scott, who's here to help answer questions related to planning, and Rachel and Leo as well.
Start off with Councilor Weaver.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, do we need to go through them individually? I feel like.
If we can get consensus, if you agree with them all, that's.
Okay, I'm just, I guess my point is these all seem to make a lot of sense to me. And thank you, Councilmember Ohm, for finding the loophole. And for, yeah, that's awesome. I like all of these. I think they make a lot of sense. And I just want to thank Mr. Lopez. I've worked with him a little bit on email and just had a great conversation. So thank you again for your help. And I sort of just want us to have a television show and do a ride along with him when he starts handing out these fines. And I think it would be fascinating.
He has an agent.
Yeah. No, I think this is going to be the next big thing. I did have one question, only because we had a short conversation online about it, and I have some constituents. This is not separate from me approving all of these things, but it's just something I wanted to throw out there to council for some thoughts. I have some constituents. We have not reached our cap in District 3. And we have some constituents who call us up asking if people around them have asked for license for, basically they're monitoring the neighbors to find out if they have started renting out their homes. And you know, they're very careful about asking what I can't answer. But to the point of these constituents, is it worth looking at the massing of certain amounts of STRs on certain blocks? In other words, the question that was asked of me was, is there a limit to, within a certain block area, a density of, and you know, the point is fair, right? They don't necessarily want to own a house on a block that's half rented into Airbnb. And so, and of course, the GIS person in me was like, oh, we put that on a map. And then I thought, well, there's a really good reason we wouldn't put that on a map publicly. However, I'm wondering if internally that's something that we may want to consider. I don't know how you would make those decisions. But I just thought the point was brought up. I thought I'd put it out there. And that's it. Thank you.
Counselor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do support all of these. I have one question about the fine schedule, and that is, do we think it has enough teeth? It seems kind of wimpy to me. I really think we could go bigger on it, honestly.
I like the way you think. We originally, and I don't know about jail, but we originally had higher amounts for the fines, and we ratcheted it back because we wanted to match the code enforcement schedule that PD uses. So that was the reasoning behind that. But it's a good point.
Have we considered, like, once you get to your third violation, you're done? Like, your license is gone? I mean, I think that we really, especially when there's wait lists, if you're,
Exactly.
you know, so I just wonder if we've considered that, because I think that that is really something that I think it's something that came up in discussion when we were talking about this. But so that's one thing. Another thing that I'd like to say is, it is very clear in this memo that staff paid a lot of attention to the conversation and direction that we gave in the past when it came to short-term rentals. I spent a significant amount of time working on that, and was dumbfounded that I left a loophole in it when I was looking through it all. So thanks for finding that. I had to go find all my notes, and that was not one thing that was in my notes. And so I appreciate these recommendations because they very much match the conversations that we've had around this table around this. And so I really appreciate that and paying attention to that. To Councilwoman Weaver's question, when we were originally crafting the code, the way that it was very hard to say you could only have so much on your block. So the way that we addressed that was A, through the cap, and B, through the limited licensing. So the limited licensing being, you can either have one whole home, you can have one whole home and one partial home. So if you owned 2 homes in Wheat Ridge, and there's a situation where someone owns 2 homes in Wheat Ridge, one in District 1 and one in District 2, that person lives in one of those homes, and they can have a partial home license. And then the home that they own in the other district, they have a whole home license. So that's the way that we addressed the numbers on the block, because that was a very large concern for our community, or at least for the group that I worked with in District 1. And keeping in mind, District 1 was littered with short-term rentals. We had the majority of them, and owned by corporations. The majority of them are owned by corporations. So that's kind of how we got around the, because we couldn't say no corporation couldn't own them. So that's how we got around, how we addressed the too many on a block, was through the cap and then through the limited licenses. And so I don't know that there is a better way to address that. I mean, we spent a really long time looking at that, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I echo what Councilmember Hoppy said. And I did have a question about closing the loophole. So what will happen with those townhomes that are currently operating as short-term rentals, but then we close this? Are they going to continue to operate? And how does that affect the cap?
Yeah, so existing licenses that were already issued, they could remain, but as soon as they're canceled, a future person would either have to get on the wait list or if they're in District 3, they could get a license also.
Thank you, Counselor Hulteen.
Thank you. So I think I actually remember why we have the townhouse loophole. And I think it was because we had a recently opened Airbnb above Get Rights and Stylus and Crate that would have been in violation of this. And we were trying to keep, I think we were looking for ways to keep things like that from having to fall. Anyway, that's my memory. Doesn't matter. So I am strongly with Councilmember Hoppy that the spine schedule does not align with the issues. And I just want to cite how much time, city staff time, and I'm going to use the Dover Street example since it's in my district. I mean, just financially, the returns on that are not there, but an Airbnb license is a privilege. And, our code enforcement is around us just trying to work with homeowners who may or may not have awareness. At some point, if they're just flagrantly ignoring, weed violations or whatever, it's an issue, but but an Airbnb is it's a contract between a homeowner and the city, and we have created a policy that is as best as we're able to try and make short-term rentals be part of the rhythm of our neighborhood in a constructive way. And so I feel strong. I would be fine with after a third violation that they lose, especially when we've got wait lists. And I would like to see the fines be significant. This is a commercial enterprise. And so, they can take their Vegas odds on their second violation because they're going to make that money in 1 or 2 nights rental. So I would propose, I think the first time, maybe they don't know. And I'm all good for assuming the best on the first time, but I would certainly by the third time like to see that be like a pretty impactful fine. And I would support after a third strike that they actually on that fourth the fourth notice of violation that they lose their license. But my question with that is, what would the appeals be for that? I mean, there's some secondary processes with that, but yeah.
Do you mind, Mark, if I'll just chime in? I mean, part of the challenge, right, is there's no license to revoke. So essentially they'd be summoned to court. We could potentially explore perhaps, Mr. Dahl, an AHO route. In fact, it's interesting, the new liquor administrative hearing officer, your new liquor authority starts on June 13th. She's just been retained by another one of her clients. I think it's Dylan or it's in the mountains to do AHO, administrative hearing officer work for STRs specifically. This is kind of, she's getting into, so again, we're not the only, I mean, we're doing well, and we're certainly, I think, ahead on doing some really great legislative work here, but there's others who are doing it too. And so that might be something we could consider, but you're absolutely right. I mean, part of the problem is, right, there is no license to revoke. Mm-hmm. And so we have to go
for
a
that
different
violation. I mean,
for that particular violation.
There could
yes.
be other violations where they do.
Yes,
license, yeah.
but for really what we're seeing, it's likely to be, it's going to be like there's no license to pull. So when we say third strike, you're out, it really means third strike, we're taking other action. And so we'll put our heads together and work with Mr. Dahl's office to kind of figure out what, I think hearing what you're saying, we're hearing what you're saying, which is make this stronger. I think we just need to think about, you all did some work back in the fall, actually, to make sure that this has legs in municipal court. And I think we might need to just consider this feedback in that term as well, right? Yep. And make sure that there really is, we can take strong action when we get to that point, because pulling a license is, and we have appeals processes, and again, Jerry's office can help with that.
Okay, yeah, so I'd love that third violation to be financially significant. And then I'd propose that we look at a court summons after the third. And then I'm excited to see the marketplace facilitator compliance up there. I mean, that's just got to be crazy making to depend on, shout out in the back. I mean, just the idea of a marketplace facilitator when they're actually like collecting the revenue and transacting and doing all of this stuff, and to, be like, oh, we're just advertising. I mean, it's just, I just don't know of another model where that happens. And so I'm very supportive of getting that in place. So supporting all of these with the request that we revisit the fine schedule and abbreviate the number of times they can get fined before getting summoned, and make that third fine pretty significant.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, staff, for going through this instead of, piecemealing and giving us a little here, a little there. You really, got into this and really looked at not just some of my initial concerns with the loophole, but making sure that, looking across the Denver metro area and seeing where we're at. I think I'm in support of everything. And I also echo my other council members. I'd like to look at, I know we have, I don't know if licensing the word, but marijuana, where we have a certain amount of limited stores that can exist in Wheat Ridge. And that's a lot of leverage, because they know that they have to be a good actor to continue their business operation, and the penalty for that is losing their license. And there's plenty of other businesses that would willing to take their place. And so I think I'm aware that some of these STRs are earning tens of thousands of dollars every month. And so the biggest loss for them is it's not a few $1,000 fine. That's nothing. It's the losing that right to operate that STR. So I'd be very supportive of looking at, how can we, if there's a bad actor, of saying like, we got 20, 50 more people behind you that would love to operate a STR if you can't be compliant with the city code. Thank you so much for all your effort, everybody.
Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I agree. This is a much better approach instead of just one at a time. And I pretty much support this, but everything up there. I do have a few questions on, well, first off, if I do get a constituent calling me up and saying, hey, my neighbor's operating an STR, I think it's unlicensed, can you verify that? And I don't know how to do that. Call you guys and okay. To that question, I was originally thinking that there'd be somewhere that I could find it.
I can just add actually what the other thing that you could do is on our website, and we can send out the link. There's a way for for your constituents, for the public. It's a form where they can report potential violations. So they can actually do it themselves. It's in our FAQs on the short-term rental page. So they can just say, this is the address. I think they're operating an STR. And then
I do appreciate that, but I guarantee you that if somebody calls me up and says, my neighbor's running an STR, I want you to find out they're not going to want to do that. They're not going to want to complain.
Send us an email.
yeah, then send an email.
So it's on me, and now that I know, I'll just pick up the phone. On the townhome loophole, I would recommend that the definitions, townhomes, condominiums, and then the zoning districts, including the planned developments.
PUD.
PDRs, yeah. That they somehow, again, it's about definitions. Because, obviously a townhome is a different property arrangement and different ownership ownership model than a townhome. So are we including condos in that as well?
No, we wouldn't. So townhome specifically is the fee simple. You own the land. It essentially functions as a single unit home. And so condos have their own separate category already
Right.
in our code, and we wouldn't be changing that. It would be, a lot of our new developments are townhomes, and they're platted where you own your lot, just like a single family home. The only difference is there's a wall that's attached.
Should that not be included? The difference between a condo and a townhome?
Yes, so that's part of the proposal is we actually don't define townhomes in our code as well. So we need to define that. We had defined it in mixed use, but not elsewhere. And yeah, we just need to clean up everything to make sure that they're not exempt.
That's the right approach, believe me. The more clarity you can put around that, because somebody's looking for a loophole and they, they've obviously found one. So And I appreciate that, and I do support the approach you guys are taking here. And so then the burden then becomes, how do you let people know about this? Because I've had people tell me, well, I didn't know that, I just thought I'd hang a shingle out there and put a vacancy sign out and I'd be all set. Obviously, there's a lot more than that, so education, informing people of what's expected, not that, and the fact that there is a cap and what that means. But yeah, you're definitely on the right path here. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Mark?
Counselor Larson, thank you. I wanted to add to what you just said that when Leo, a lot of the trips that Leo has taken recently is a lot of education. He goes prepared to educate because we realize that there are a lot of people who think that they can just put a shingle up and say, this is my short-term rental, and they really don't know the program. So am I correct, Leo? You've done a fair amount of that?
Yeah, even through email when I approve or, if there's questions about it, I make sure that they understand that their neighbors have to, nights, depending on if they're residential. Just educating them as best I can so they got the knowledge behind the decisions that they can make to operate their property.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with everybody else that these are great recommendations to move forward with. I just want to double check because Councilor Olteen brought it up. Though, like the unit that are above like Get Right, that would still be legal, right? Just because that's in a
Yes, so
commercial.
that's a different category. That's more of a
Right.
commercial property. We're talking like Yarrow Gardens, for example, is MUN, and those are all townhomes. So right now, an unlimited number of those could be short-term rental, whole home, and we want to apply the cap like we would in any other residential setting.
Great. Okay. Yep. I'm totally for it. I won't say anything else. Let's keep going.
Thank you. If we have no more discussion, then do we have consensus to move forward with the list on the board with sort of enhanced enforcement provisions as described? We do. Does that give you the clarity that you need? Okay, thank you very much. Great presentation. And a lot of information there. So, moving right along, we're going to move to agenda item number 3. Get a couple of minutes for our players to, the next group to be able to enter and sign in, please.
I moved them to my.
They are. You need to be able to stuff them in your pockets, though, so it's a little tough on the chips. Okay, we're going to move to agenda item number 3. This is a discussion on our affordable housing strategy, the implementation of inclusionary housing zoning program. Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lauren, do you have any, you want to do introductions?
Yeah, maybe
or-
introductions.
I don't know if
You
everybody's
haven't
met
been here
Terry,
tonight,
but
have you? Yeah. So Terry Ware fills the housing program position that we created after we made the affordable housing strategy. And Terry started in December, similar timing to Leo, and has been here about 6 months and has done a great job getting his bearings and getting really connected to some of the groups that are working on affordable housing in the county. And so you've seen that sort of placemat work plan from the affordable housing strategy. We've been chipping off a lot of things behind the scenes, doing a lot of homework. Terry, I'll maybe let you introduce some of your background. Brings a lot of experience from the Denver metro area and elsewhere, state and federal agencies, and there you go. And he is definitely the expert in our team upstairs on housing policy. So I know he could teach a graduate level course on this, but he's really good at explaining it, and tried to calibrate it to the third agenda item. There you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Turn the little button right there, down below there.
This,
There you
there
go.
we go. Okay. Well, thank you for taking time out of your meeting schedule. I think it's interesting because the previous two presentations are all related to this issue of housing. And obviously, it's complex because if it weren't, then anybody could do it. And, you know, if you've been reading articles in the Denver Post, you know that the governor's very much interested in this, as is everyone else. I spent in a previous life many years working at HUD in the Disaster Recovery and Special Issues Division, and much of the disaster recovery portfolio really revolves around housing, because that is really the key element in most communities. So I have a presentation which really supports the memorandum, and Lauren and Jana Easley and myself have been working on this for a while. And we've talked about, but haven't talked to Patrick about, or the mayor about, coming back at some point with a broader focus on housing, because with the number of bills that have been passed and at the state level, the amount of effort at the federal level, the middle income housing, tax credit programs, social impact bonds. I mean, there's a lot focused in housing, and for no surprise, I mean, every community across the country clearly is in crisis about housing. So having said all that, I'll go through the presentation fairly quickly. Let's see if I can. So sort of working backwards, you have the memo, and I assume you've read it. So, you know, these are the questions or issues revolving around this component. And as Lauren mentioned a minute ago, there's been a lot of background and policy work that's been done previously. The 2009 housing or neighborhood revitalization strategy that was updated. The 2005 that was updated again in 2019. Previous city plans through various iterations. Your adoption of the affordable housing strategy and action plan. Clearly, this has been a topic that's been at top of mind. So we've taken this one piece and brought it to you tonight. And so working backwards, there are 6 questions that we want to try and address. So this is in the memo, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background about how we arrived at these 6 questions and how they relate to the overall issue. So staff recommendations are also included in the memo, and there are 6 of them. Make the program mandatory, create a fee in lieu option that's less than the cost of construction, and a program that's not incentive-based. 10% of all new residential units would be affordable at 80 to 120% average median income. All new residential development of 10 or more units across the city, so it would be geographically broad, and then minimize the long-term administrative obligations of the city. And that's a goal for a variety of reasons. I was listening to the discussion about short-term rental as well as the ADUs. At another life, I was the Director of Housing and Business Development for the City and County of Denver. And as Stapleton was redeveloping, one of the challenges we had with Forest City was keeping track of affordable units and income levels, et cetera. And there were big leaks. I mean, you know, and I had a staff of 35 in the housing program, and it became difficult working with title companies, et cetera, and making sure that you're constantly updating that. So this issue about administrative burden is an important one. So we're going to cover background, what it is, cities that have done it. There are a number in the Front Range that have these programs, how those programs are structured, and what we carry forth from those and the next steps. So, you know, as I said, it's complicated. I mean, all these factors go into housing. Materials, we're still suffering material shortage. Wood's extremely expensive if done in construction around your house. Land, there's not a lot of vacant land. So when we talk about development in Wheat Ridge, we're really talking about infill and redevelopment mostly. They're not large parcels of land either. Capital, well, you know, as you all know, interest rates right now are at 7% for, you know, long-term mortgage. Construction costs are higher, 8% for construction loans. That makes a difference. Labor, you know, if you look at Texas, one reason they generate a lot of new housing is because they have immigration policies that are a little different. And so we don't have a supply of labor here. If you try to get a deck constructed around your house or some other kind of work, it's difficult to find contractors. Public policy, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The marketplace, directly tied to wages and incomes. Wages haven't kept up with costs, so that's a major factor in looking at the cost of housing and why it's expensive, and job growth, related to wage income. And so, there's this cycle that typically happens when you have primary jobs that come into the community. Those are typically those that are $70,000 and above. People who can work anywhere, then that generates demand for single-family housing, which generates demand for retail services, which generates demand for multifamily housing, because those people who work in those services live in that multifamily housing. I think the most interesting part of this slide is the bottom one, the political and the marketplace. As long as I've been doing a presentation that included this slide, I still haven't come up with a good how those two things mesh. But you see it because it's NIMBYism and it's YIMBYism. Yes, there's a demand for affordable housing. Everyone recognizes that. No one wants it in their community because of the implication of who it serves. And that's why affordable housing, now the nomenclature is workforce housing, because it's directed at policemen and firemen. It's a more subtle sell to the community. But the reality is it's still retail workers. 9,000 people in the community from the last survey that was done for the NHS make less than $40,000 a year. And much of the employment base here is in retail. So one of the disaster components I worked on when Lyons was hit was most of the housing that was damaged with people who worked in the restaurants. Following the disaster, oh yeah, let's get those people back in town. A year later, let them find housing somewhere else. It's interesting how the community attitudes can change, but that's a big issue, the political and the interface of the market. I know I'm talking fast. I want to get through this so we can have discussion, so forgive me. The housing train used to be, you'd get out, you'd move away from home, you get a crappy apartment, then you get a nicer apartment, then you save money and you buy a condo, then you buy a small house, a starter home, then you buy a nicer house, then you retire, and the cycle comes in, and people move up through that chain. Well, it's stalled. For folks like myself, we have a 3% loan on our house. Where would we move if we could sell it? Into a smaller house and pay more money? And then you have people who are challenged, retail workers who are trying to move into the housing that's, being generated in the marketplace. And from a developer standpoint, you're just trying to, cover your costs. So, you don't really have any interest there. And people even at the upper end are, competing for those same amounts of housing units. So this is much of this information is out of the AHS. So I'm happy to go through some of that. No surprise, incomes needed, even for a townhouse, modest townhouse, $132,000 a year. In the U.S. population, less than 10% of the population makes over $100,000 out of 366 million people, of which 100 million or so are workers. For rental units, same thing, $41,000 is the median renter income. The unit that gets you is about $1,600 a month for a one bedroom. So, once again, the housing market's divided up in a variety of ways. For affordability, for a $508,000 unit, and these were old numbers now, I think the median value in the Denver metro area or in Wheat Ridge is like $563. Need to make $160,000 a year. How many people do you know that make $160,000? Even combined incomes, that's difficult these days. That's two people making $80,000 a year. There aren't that many jobs. So going back to what specifically we're talking about tonight, should we make it voluntary or mandatory? What's the impact of inclusionary zoning? Affordability and supply, what happens to the marketplace? Development patterns may change. Equity and gentrification, you see this in some areas. Economic vitality and long-term effects. I pulled this is a virtual model that I found on the Boston Globe's website. And what was interesting about it is you can see clearly here the calculations that occur as you apply different criteria. So the slide on the left, this is without any affordable units at all. And so, and what was more surprising to me, In Boston, the median average income is $81,000. In Wheat Ridge, it's $79,000. So these numbers are pretty relevant. I was surprised by that. But at any rate, so at no affordable units incorporated into it, because what you're really doing is you're subsidizing. You're either subsidizing the developer or you're subsidizing the population that you're serving. So with no units, the rent's $32.83 a month. So you require 10% affordable units. At 17 units, someone's got to pay for them because the cap on affordable units is at $1,600 a month. So that means that each of the remaining 753 units are now paying $200 more a month. Well, it's already at $34.68. If that's a third of your income, that means you're bringing home $9,000 a month after taxes of $72,000 a year. Once again, there's not a large population that's making those kind of dollars. When you go to 20% or 34 units, now it's creeped to another $200. So now each of those other units is paying $400 a month to subsidize the affordable units. And at 30%, 51 units, now they're paying $600 more a month because the other units, the other population are subsidizing the affordable units. That's the way it works, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. Briefly, I'm going to ask you to notice at the top, they have land, union labor, parking, and green energy as variables that you can apply to this equation. So when you apply union labor, one of the reasons affordable housing costs so much more is because typically you're bundling 4 or 5 different funding sources together, each with requirements. Davis-Bacon is a big one. You know, you're required to use union labor. And so now that's boosted your cost even more. Parking, I think parking's a wash. The most recent bill before the state was to require or encourage communities to eliminate parking requirements. I think it's a wash because if you're a developer, you're going to put parking in because you need it. You're not going to build a unit in Capitol Hill without parking on site. And in most communities, I have 2 daughters. One's young and she's looking for an apartment now in DC. It's a requirement that it has on-site underground parking because she doesn't feel safe parking on the street. If I'm a developer, I'm taking that into account. So sure, remove all parking requirements. It's not going to make a difference in my opinion. It just isn't. And then green energy, working at HUD in the disaster realm. With new housing, we want to make it resilient, sustainable. We want it to have, energy saving appliances. It's another 5% on cost. So that $90 million that it costs to build these units now goes to $95 million. Yes, it's good in the long term, but the question you have to ask yourself is who accrues the value of that? It's not the tenants, it's the developer, because he's in for it long term, relatively speaking. So this gets to the essence of that. So, no developer is going to build in today's marketplace without a minimum of 15% rate of return. If I go to a bank, the bank's going to look at the pro forma, which is, the numbers about the financing, and wonder, why would you get involved in this for any less return than that? Well, why that's important is because in a strong marketplace, then when we talk about we want more open space, we want different amenities, we want you to, provide money for affordable housing, the whole litany of additional social benefits, which are valid, that you'd like to accrue in a community, more parkland space, to contribute to on-site daycare. That's all great in a strong marketplace. In a weak marketplace, what you're doing is reducing the return on investment to the developer, and he's looking for participants to provide equity financing for his project as well. So all that plays into, do you have a weak market or a strong market? And it's going to vacillate back and forth between one or the other over time. And so in Wheat Ridge right now, it's a fairly strong marketplace because of the demand that's moving out of Denver. Obviously historically, Wheat Ridge has pretty much been blue-collar housing for the employment base that was Denver. And that's changing a little bit. When I've talked to real estate developers and brokers, why is Wheat Ridge so attractive? It's because it's close to the mountains, it's close to major transportation, and it's outside of Denver. But, once again, public policy has an impact on that. Why would I develop in Wheat Ridge if it's more costly and all I have to do is literally cross the street to develop in Edgewater or Arvada or Lakewood? And so the community is small enough that the larger regional marketplace has an impact on what can happen here, and what happens here has an impact on adjacent communities as well, which gets us to this slide. So I looked at a number of other communities, Arvada, Broomfield, Boulder, Denver, Edgewater, Englewood, Golden, Littleton, Lakewood, and Longmont also has an inclusionary housing zoning ordinance. So, it's a thing. They deal with it in different ways. A couple of the communities use voluntary methods. Most of the communities use mandatory methods, and it varies in a variety of ways between what's the percent of affordable housing required, what incentives they provide or allow, and how they monitor it, and what other options they provide. This was the attachment one, and I'm not quite sure if it made it into the memo. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, well, good. See, I was on vacation, so I managed to miss all that chaos. So back to the program structure and components. Fee in lieu, House Bill 1117 requires an alternative to building affordable units. That alternative can either be off-site affordable units, or it can be an in lieu fee. Those are the typical two options that most communities utilize. I honestly, because of the lack of land availability in Wheat Ridge, the off-site component doesn't really, I think, isn't really effective here. And even in cases where it is, you get into that discussion. So I hate to keep going down rabbit holes, so stop me, Lauren. One of the projects I worked on was the redevelopment of Denver Union Station. And Continuum was under a lot of pressure from the city and housing advocates to provide on-site affordable housing. But because of the crazy amount of money that had to go into infrastructure there, the affordable units would have been enormously expensive to construct. So what they offered was to build units off-site around another transit stop. And so the advocates became split on that issue because they wanted equity at every location. So no, we're redeveloping Denver Union Station. We must have affordable units. You could have built twice the number of affordable units anywhere else other than at Union Station. And so there's that dilemma that communities face about what's the intent here? What are we really trying to accomplish? So you're going to be faced with a lot of the same discussions or decision points as well. What's our intent? Is it to build affordable units, or is it to supplement the housing fund? So Boulder, as an example, their in lieu fee is 10% higher than it would actually cost to build the unit on site. That's because they want the units on site. And part of the challenge Denver and others have faced is when they get the money, the in lieu fee instead, and developers would typically rather pay that than construct it on site for a variety of reasons, then how do you use it? Because it's not enough to build one unit, and most cities are not in the development business, so then you have to wait until at least 2 units, you get money for 2 units. Now, still the question is, what do you do with the money? So that's part of the question here. Which is the better approach? Is it better to, make the in lieu fee such that it's punitive to force people to build it on site, or is it better to look long term and think, well, maybe we can accrue and aggregate the funds to provide and act as a partner with Front Range Housing, as an example, and use that money to be partners in the program. So, typical incentives. Financial, density, and height, which are really kind of the same thing. No one builds height for the sake of building height. You build it because you have more density, and that's where you get there. And if you build higher units, one of the reasons you see the 4 or 5 story units that we see here now, fire code changes when you go higher, elevator, and so costs go up basically. And they may not be justified by the rate of the return that you get for additional units. So the two are kind of the same. And as you are well aware, we have the charter, which puts caps on both density and height in most areas. Current incentives, the waiver of the parkland fee and reduced parking. Most other communities, they reduce fees for taps, et cetera. But because most of the utilities are provided by third-party facilitators here, you don't really have that option. Once again, my opinion is that reducing parking doesn't get you anywhere. It's a wash. So this slide simply illustrates the incentives by type and usage in various communities. So density is the most common incentive. We're requiring 10% of 10 units built. So if you build another unit, that's affordable, then you get another unit that's market rate. And so that helps disperse the pain, if you will, over a larger number of units. But that's not really an option here per se. Zoning variances, once again, the city, as part of its overall effort, is looking at streamlining the process, et cetera. really what you're trying to do is reduce the risk that developers encounter in building and development. Fee reduction waivers, expedited permitting, all those things work. None. Some communities offer no incentives, and it's more effective than some of the others. So that's kind of a head scratcher. So the program's structure and components, as we've talked about, affordability requirement. The AHS recommends targeting rental units at the $50,000 to $100,000 income level and for sale units at $100,000 to $150,000, which is approximately 80 to 100% AMI. Affordable housing developers typically serve lower incomes. When you're below 60% AMI, it's all rental, and those are heavily subsidized projects. Foothills has done a great job at doing that. They have a number of units. I think I calculated about 230 units that have been produced over the past several years by Foothills in partnership with other. So they're working on that population. At 60 to 80%, they're still going to be heavily subsidized, but there's an opportunity there depending upon if you give a developer land for free, then he can make that work. But at 80% and 120%, those are units that can work with some subsidy. And once again, that subsidy is either going to come from the developer through passing those costs on to tenants, or it can come from subsidizing the population. So sort of like Section 8 programs, you can provide people vouchers. And we had a long discussion about that, but one of the discussions was, well, do we target policemen and firemen? Well, policemen primarily, because firemen work for the metro district, but city employees. So at least that it's benefiting someone who has some relationship to Wheat Ridge. But if you just open the door and say, well, if you live here, we'll give you a voucher. Well, I could probably spend my voucher better in another community at a cheaper cost. I mean, what's the benefit to the public in Wheat Ridge? So, that was a long discussion. 10% of all new residential seems financially feasible. That was what was recommended in the AHS, and it has less impact, generally speaking, on market rate prices. Should the IHZ apply to all new development? It's a question. We think yes. Only in mixed-use zone districts? Well, that was what the AHS recommended. But as you can see by this map, there are very limited areas in Wheat Ridge where this would apply. And so that's why, just based upon today's policies, that's why, you might get 5 units, 6 units, based upon the areas where there are waivers that are allowable. So that was one of the reasons why we decided to go full bore and do citywide. And a lower in lieu fee, because we figured, we're not trying to, given the limited areas where housing might be constructed, we're probably better off trying to gather money and act as a partner with other developers who are doing affordable housing. So administration, compliance review and record keeping, monitoring eligibility, that whole discussion you had about the ADU and short-term rentals, that's a challenge. It's a challenge everywhere. Most title companies are not diligent about reporting to the cities where these things occur about what's happening with the deed. And most people aren't looking through the deed for those kind of restrictions. And most brokers and developers would rather just get the unit sold and move on. And then what happens a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when those units resell? I mean, that was the problem out of Stapleton. When they started reselling, or when the individuals who lived in them, their income rose above the cap. Now what do? Do you force them out? So, I mean, the whole monitoring compliance issue is a big one. And then, as I said, trying to minimize that administrative burden, because right now I am the housing staff. So the next steps, based upon the recommendations that we put forth, is to procure a consultant for an economic impact analysis. We want to make sure that if we do a fee in lieu, that it really is purposeful, that it will generate enough money to actually be a partner or build units, but it's not overly onerous that, we squash the market. What happened in Denver, Denver had a requirement that developments of 20 units or more had to include affordable housing. So what do you think happened? They got a bunch of 19-unit developments. And they still have a backlog that came in the day prior to the ordinance going into effect, because so many people were trying to get under the wire. It's costly to build affordable housing, as strange as that sounds. Talked about the affordability range. Should that be 60 to 80, 80 to 100, 80 to 100? What population are we really trying to target? And the AHS recommended 80 to 120, and that seems reasonable given what we've seen, but we want to verify that, we want to be sure what we're doing works. And then how's it applied? So once we get through all that, then we'll be back to you with a draft ordinance that really basically incorporates the things that we talked about tonight. So I tried to be quick. It's not 12. I guess I accomplished that.
That's good.
So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilors, questions? Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. And I feel so grateful, actually, to have someone on our staff and within our city that has all the knowledge and experience that you have. And so thank you for choosing our thank you for choosing our community and spend your time in our community. All of the recommendations, I agree with all of the recommendations. I would like to see I would like to see a draft ordinance in front of us with these recommendations. I feel like the first study session we had on affordable housing was like 6 years ago. And it was really, a lot of the options that were available were kind of untried and untested. And I think the council at the time was kind of like, it just doesn't seem like this is something we could do, right? And then we kept going down the road further, and then we got our affordable housing strategy done, and I am very happy to see us moving down the road with this. And I think that it's important for our community, and it's true. Fees in lieu of for us, we are not developers, nor do we have really any land. At this point, we got rid of the bank. We don't really have any land that we own. And so really partnering with those that are building that already in the community with the monies that we have, and also our plan to try to, we have affordable rentals, but they're not quality. And so trying to move forward with, making our affordable rentals more quality, I think is a really great place for us to go. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you for the good presentation. And as most everyone in the room knows, I worked in development for 18 years, and my father actually did one of the first inclusionary zoning projects at 2900 Downing Street. And at the time, there just really wasn't a precedent in terms of how this works, so it was incredibly challenging. And what happened at the time is this, and he was willingly walking into it, wanting to actually, he likes solving challenging problems, and that's what he got. But what ended up happening were a bunch of these deed restricted, like teeny tiny little condos and apartments, like scattered throughout like the fringes of downtown, that weren't really serving, the holistic population who was in need of affordable housing. So I really like this approach holistically, in part because we can rest into, I don't want to say rest, but we have our affordable housing strategy, I think, is really strong and really speaks to where we are as a city and what the best opportunities are. And with our affordable housing fund, if we're able to boost participation in that, we can really be looking for those opportunities where we're actually, able to reinvest in existing housing stock that is more family and multi-generational forward, which is one of the things we hear a lot. So I think supporting the in lieu of, and I think you can't do 10% without a 10-unit minimum because otherwise your math doesn't work. Right. But I think the numbers are right, and I definitely support the proposal for a consultant to help us figure out what the market balance is, especially because the market could be changing in a year. So I think understanding we're in one market now, but there's a market cycle. And so how do we look at that over the long term so we're not having to revisit our in lieu of fees with too much frequency, because that's not good for the market either. So I definitely support doing some deeper research into the best fees. And then I am very much looking forward to future conversations on how we can spend those funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How have the discussions gone, or have there been discussions with some of our current property owners on interest in using some of those funds to upgrade their facilities.
On the NOAA, the natural green, yeah, Terry had some conversations with some of our apartment managers.
Sure, because I've sort of been working on two tasks, this and the NOAA program, naturally occurring affordable housing. And that's been a little more challenging because I've had conversations with a few individuals, and I had a conversation with an individual who wasn't really a representative of there's a organization representing apartment managers. And so it's been difficult to really find an organization that represents, particularly here, because the majority of units here are fairly small. They tend to be duplexes, triplexes, units less than 19, less than 10 units. So, often, and as I discovered in doing some property searches, many of those folks live out of state, California primarily. And so, as we get into the NOAA program, we're going to, try and think of a way to do better outreach, either via survey or put together a request for submittals of proposals. But it's been really difficult to get a broader kind of outreach effort to get different perspectives about how this might work. My concern is that if you're a property owner and your units are fairly well maintained and you're in good financial standing, what incentive could the city provide you that you'd want to cooperate with us, with our desire being long-term affordability? Where I could go to a bank, I might have to pay more interest, but the bank don't really care about whether they're affordable or not. They just want you to pay the monthly note. Come to us, it may be a lower interest rate, but we want 10-year period of affordability. I think about the gap I'm going to lose in market rate units. So that's some of the discussion. So really, the crux of the program is twofold. How do we get outreach so we get input from everyone? And how do we structure it so that the incentive is big enough? It goes back to your comment. We might be better off just partnering with affordable housing developers like Foothills as actually an acquisition program, and they go out and do that. Colorado Gives as a program where they provide loans. And so they're actually creating a loan program, grant program. And we've had discussions about maybe taking our affordable housing fund and, providing money to their program. These are questions and issues that we'll bring back to you as we get further into the NOAA program. But, we want to do this one first because actually it seems a little easier. And then we'll come back and deal with that at a future date.
Okay, great. Well, and I agree. I agree with the recommendations here. I think that they all make sense. We've seen throughout, I guess, the U.S. affordable housing done poorly, right? San Francisco, I guess, is probably a pretty good example. Boulder, in some cases, is a pretty good example of it, where it drives, high and low, right? So I think we're in a different position in Wheat Ridge because we're not talking about that many more units being built in all of Wheat Ridge moving forward, right? We're landlocked, we're property locked. We'll see some redevelopment over time, but where we're at right now, we're not going to build that many more units. So the fee in lieu of makes sense to me. I just would like to make sure that that fee doesn't just sit in an account somewhere where we have the best intention to develop or redevelop our NOAA and all that, but none of our property owners want to use it. Or so, if we're giving it to Foothills or we're giving it to people that are going to use it, that makes sense to me. So I'd like to see us move forward with that as well. But just making sure that we're doing the outreach to those property owners that, we do have. I know a lot of them do live outside of the state, but we do have some old families that live in Wheat Ridge that control a lot of that, especially affordable housing in Wheat Ridge that we can probably get to pretty quickly.
I've had discussions with them. I want to just add one thing. One of the, I won't say concerns, but issues is that our acceptance of the 1, 2, 3 state funds requires us to build approximately 73 units a year.
Right.
Over the 3-year period. So, there's some pressure there to move quickly and forward on getting this done.
Great. Thank you.
Councilor Gozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Terry, you come with a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciated you explaining everything. And I will preface this by saying I generally am not supportive and actually very opposed to a mandatory inclusionary housing program. I like the model that you showed. I think that it creates those market rate units to be unaffordable, and really what I see is a missing middle, right? Like we're taking out the middle class because it's only those that can afford the high market housing units and those that are being subsidized by it. And so, a lot of us in this community that would fall within that middle income range wouldn't be applicable to this kind of a program. And so when we initially had started talking about this, I was in support of, an incentive-based kind of voluntary program, but our hands are really tied because of the charter. And I think you've really explained that very well. And so I appreciate you taking a broader look at this and saying, well, we do want those fee in lieu of, to invest back into the already existing affordable housing units. And so I agree with Councilmember Stites in that, I would like to see how those funds would be utilized. And I would also like to see the details of the numbers that the consultant would come up with as far as the market. And I think that we're kind of in this really weird place with the housing market where it's swinging, in two different directions. It's really strong, it's really weak, it's, the inflationary and mortgage rates, there's so many components that we have to take into consideration. And so I think being able to see those numbers a little bit more clearly, and I mean, you explained it so very well, though. And I echo Councilmember Hoppy's comments, and thank you for choosing our community. It sounds like you just have a lot of expertise and experience. So perfect person. I wouldn't go that far. So I would like to see the numbers to be able to come to a real decision on the dais. But I do see that fee in lieu option being the best alternative to this mandatory program. You had actually just brought something up about those 73 units over that 3-year period of time. How does this incorporate into that? And if we're reinvesting into those already existing units, does it count as towards that? Or is it even feasible to reach that goal?
Well, we had that discussion about meeting with Jeffco, County to have that same discussion, because we've assisted, Wheat Ridge has partnered with Foothills on the Hives and a couple other projects. Yes, that should count towards that number. And so I think the state's still trying to figure out how this all works. I mean, I think there's a lot of valid criticism about, I think the intent is good where the state is at, but it does seem like it's sort of one size fits all, not applicable to every community. I mean, that's just my opinion. So, we're discussing those issues with Jeff Cohen. I'm sure we'll have ongoing discussions with DOH as well.
Councilor Snell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Terry, for this is a great presentation, lots of great info and a wealth of knowledge. So again, thank you for being here. Just a quick question on, I'm turning my head because in my packet, the table is sideways. Other than Denver and Boulder on this list, which of the communities have had the inclusionary housing zoning program the longest, would you say?
Denver.
Yeah. Denver and Boulder in that order?
Denver, Boulder,
okay.
Those two,
yeah,
particularly because they have strong markets.
Yeah.
And that's really, and these other communities have come along, Littleton,
mm-hmm.
most recently, because they have a lot of work that's occurring around the transit station there.
Yep.
So that's really sort of driven a lot of it.
I was going to ask that next. Who is the more recent? Littleton? Okay.
Lakewood's talking about it. They just adopted an affordable housing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It includes some reference to inclusionary housing. Golden's kind of weird. They don't really have an inclusionary housing ordinance, but they provide an incentive if you voluntarily include it. And then I forget which community it is, to your point, it's 0.5. You have 500 units or more, you have to build 0.5. So how do you do that? So really, I mean, the threshold is 10 from a mathematical standpoint. So I had some conversations with the staff. I think there's just the political environment. Anyway, but
That's great. No, that answers my question. I was just wondering, who is like a newer kid on the block with that and, more established. All good information. I just really wanted to know that, and I'm definitely in favor of the recommendation. So thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Ware. This is really, really informative and educational and well explained, because I've been just wrestling with this for the last few years to understand. I'm supportive of all of the recommendations, and I would just really appreciate the time staff has spent researching it. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Terry, for your presentation. That was really good. I've seen a lot of different presentations over the years in affordable housing, and just keep letting me learn more about it. A couple questions or ideas that I've had is, so I've had conversations with developers, and it does seem like that 5-story is kind of the magic threshold of where 4 is great, 5 is okay, but after 5 it gets really, really expensive. However, in Wheat Ridge, we have taken areas out of the city, out of the height density, and could we, what would you think about if in those specific areas, if they developed less than 5 stories? Because if you had 5 stories and you say you did a fee in lieu based on that 5 stories, you would have X amount. But if you had 3 stories, it would be less than X amount, right? Because it's based on a certain percentage of the units. So doing a some type of assessment, and maybe it might be based off of the 4 stories of like, you can build up to 5, but we're going to assess you a certain amount of whatever fee in lieu based on 4 stories. If you decide to build 1, 2, or 3, that's up to you, but we still want that fee in lieu of 4 stories.
so is it based upon the height of the structure? Is that
Well, the amount of units you could get in that piece of property, I'm saying, because the problem is like I said, that we have that 35-foot height cap. And so, because the opposite often happens is we'll have neighborhoods where then they'll come in and they'll scrape off the homes and then they'll put in the 3 stories. But then we'll have an area where you could do, 6, 7 stories, and they put in the 3 stories. So they can put more height, but they give less. And so you have that lost potential of affordable housing units. And we have such a limited amount of land. And this would be rare anyway, to be honest, that it would happen. But I'm just saying, I know 5 seems to be like more than 5 units or 5 stories, and it gets really expensive because of what you said, the elevators. And so looking at it from the perspective of, we're going to assess a 4-story amount, fee in lieu. And if you want to build 3, you still got to come up with that fee in lieu. So really pushing them. But then if you want to build 5, so trying to find a balance. If you want to build 5, we're not going to assess you affordable units for that 5th story. That is what I guess I'd call your density bonus, Yeah. But,
It's almost
just,
the inverse. We've talked about this before. How do you get people to build to our maximum? Because we have such few areas where you can almost disincentivize building shorter buildings in areas where you're allowed to build taller buildings. Is that what we're,
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So that's one concept. And then the other one that I've heard in Boulder is, and I've talked about this before, is there's a company in Boulder, they're doing what's called a fractionalized home ownership, and it's akin to the tenants in common. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, it sounds like timeshare.
No, it's
Because if it's fractional ownership, I mean,
there's partners is what it is. So someone would own the home, but they own a small percentage.
right,
And that partner helps them get the down payment.
who actually resides in the unit?
Yeah, the person resides in the unit, but there's partners. So I guess this is something our attorney is familiar with. It happens in California in the commercial real estate industry where you have tenants in common.
I know, we can certainly take a look at it.
Okay.
I mean, I'd make 2 comments. I hope I'm not going to insult any developers, but, they're like TV producers. If one thing worked, then it's got to work 20 times. And so the townhouses and the slip-ins that you see, because they're, plans pretty much right off the shelf. You just find a piece of land. And there are, several types of developers. There are individuals who own land. And they typically are not good developers, or they're landowners or land developers. There are developers who have contacts in the community, like Kroger, and so they do a bunch of Kroger shopping centers. And then there are developers who look for market opportunities. They look at what's happening in the community and they say, oh, we're building townhomes. All right, that's what I'm going to do. I'll get an architect, we'll build townhomes on this property. Oh, now it's 4-story building. So part of it is the marketplace. And to Lauren's point, right now, the marketplace isn't looking for 5-story buildings. I mean, that's kind of, and it just isn't. And so you can't force it. The second comment I would make, Denver went through a whole thing with their form-based zoning. And at the time, I was working in economic development in Denver, we were in ongoing tension with the planning department, because what happened was that once they put the form-based zoning in place, real estate appraisers come out and they know the maximum you can build on the property. So that's the value of the land. So the value of the land has a major component into the cost of development. So although you may say, well, we're going to assess you for 4, but even if you build 3, the land value is going to reflect the 4. So now the developer's in the hole if he doesn't build to 4, because the value of the land reflects the 4-story building, not the 3-story building. And the value of the land is 20% generally of the development cost. So that's the challenge with any of these. The financial numbers, start shifting. You go the 4 over 1s or 5 over 1s. You've heard that. It's type 5 construction over type 1 construction. Basically, it's a concrete podium with the 4 stories on top. You see that all in big blue. That works because everyone knows how to do it. I mean, townhomes work because everyone knows how to do it. So where the developer's trying to reduce risk is trying to do a product that everyone knows that he can do today, that doesn't require any zoning requirements or zoning variances. He's got an architect and contractors who know how to do it. They're going to take the easiest path. So the more complicated you make it, and the more, if you do this, we'll do that. My opinion is that makes it more challenging. The best thing to do is just simply say, this is the rule. You have to do 10% all day long. And you look at it and go, okay, I can do those numbers. I can make it work. But I do think that, we could be, more directive. But we can certainly take a look at it. I think that's an interesting idea.
Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would tend to agree with Councilmember Dozeman that we need to be careful with mandatory because of the unintended consequences that are outlined in the memo that are very, very real possibilities. The targeting of middle-income households makes the most sense. And when you look at I did do a quick search of HUD's demographics, and for Jefferson County, the median family income for the Denver MSA is $130,000. For a 80%, that family of 4 median income is $102,650. So that's the 80%. And so it indicates that there are the income levels in Jefferson County are noticeably higher than they are elsewhere. And I think it needs that the latest data needs to be kind of baked into what you're looking at. But the other thing, and I'll wrap this up by asking more of a 30,000-foot question. When you look at demographics and you look at my generation, the baby boomers, and the fact that we're approaching retirement and moving off to retirement homes and senior living and selling our houses within the next 10 years, how does that figure into your long-term plans or anybody's long-term plans for housing markets? It seems like we're everything's tight now. Nobody wants to make a move. Nobody wants to sell because where are they going to go? But baby boomers, the 76 million people, are going to be moving out of the picture within the next 10 years. So I'd like to think that if we put a policy in place today that says we need to bring in a certain number of affordable housing because conditions today say that this is needed and they are needed, what happens 10 years down the road to that housing?
Well, I think there are two things. One of the reasons why real estate is a popular investment is because the rates of return are pretty consistent. It's not as liquid as it is, but we've crossed that threshold. I'm not quite sure when it happened, maybe in the 60s, where housing stopped being primarily shelter and started being primarily a commodity. Where one of the reasons I think communities get so much pushback is because in 1989, when Reagan changed the tax code, the only remaining write-off for the average middle-class person was the home loan. That was it. And so even in that sense, it became more valuable. That's why, people argue against affordable housing. There have been dozens of studies that have shown affordable housing, denser housing, does not reduce property values. Yet the perception in the community is that it reduces property values. And why is that important? Because that's the one piece of wealth that most people have. That's how you finance your kids' education, your retirement, your vacation. And so, in American mythology, the single family home, I just got back from Europe. My wife and I were having this discussion last night. What is the difference? We have such a lock-in on that English home and the pasture land, everyone's single family home with their little plot. The density, everyone loves going to Europe, no one wants to live there because the density, it's just too urban for most people, and we have such a different psychology. So I think we're challenged by the cultural importance that we put upon housing. So I don't know. I guess to get back to your point, so housing continues to escalate every year because it's an investment. So 5 years from now, yes, interest rates will be lower, but housing will still be more expensive because you want to solve the housing problem, build more housing. That's really the answer, build more housing. And it's not happening. I was reading an article yesterday in 1970, starter homes. This was an article in the New York Times about starter homes. Starter homes in 1970 were producing nationwide, I think somewhere around 500,000. In 2022, 70,000 starter homes. And those are people, who are just out of college or young families. So it's the train, it's the housing train again. We're not building the entire train anymore. Developers, you see this in retail. Cherry Creek Shopping Center, Tiffany's would rather have one person come in and spend $50,000 than 20 people come in and spend $1,000. And so from a market perspective, the whole market has shifted that way. Developers would rather build luxury housing because they don't have to worry about income verification, or they know you got the money. The other thing that's changed is investments. So you have venture capitalists who are buying houses for cash. 30%, a third of housing bought throughout the United States last year was bought for cash, mostly by investments. A third. So, how do you get on the train if it's really challenging. And the numbers that I use, this thing, 79, yes, AMI is higher in Jefferson County, but it's lower in Wheat Ridge.
But getting back to this idea of the population, Gen X, you look at the troughs and the heights and whatnot, and you take a big chunk of the population out. These are mostly the people that own the property, right? And if they're not owning the property and they're selling it, does that not drive the market down?
No, because they're selling for more. In my neighborhood, I live in Park Hill, our neighbors just sold their house, cash buyer, young couple, $1.2 million. So a house 2 blocks away, $2.7 million. These houses were built in 1950s. My house is 100 years old, so it was built in 1920. And it cost $25,000 to build. In 1920. Now it's, assessment value is about $1.2 million. We can do anything in the house. It's just the market can. So if the market froze, then maybe that door would open, but those costs are not going to go down. I mean, and it's because demand is up, supply and demand. There's more, we're not building enough housing, so there continues to be more demand than there is supply. And that's going to continue to keep housing prices high.
And what we saw in 2008 and 2009 with the, that recession, did it not put a dent in?
It did not, because what happened was that's a subprime issue. So what happened was that people got over leveraged, and you had investment banks who were letting people buy homes who shouldn't have. You know, I mean, they didn't have the income, they were falsifying documents, they weren't verifying income, and so then they bundled those, and people like Lehman Brothers bought them and resold them. And then when those people couldn't pay their mortgages, which was what backed up those MBSs, then that's why the housing market failed. But we're in a different circumstance now. Banks have figured it out. They're not doing subprime anymore because they can sell to ventures. And so the venture capitalists are buying up homes and renting them out. And then they'll sell them off after 5 to 7 years because they're not putting any money into maintenance. So if there's an opportunity, it may be in those rental homes that the venture capitalists have, purchased when those come back on market. But bottom line is we're just not building enough housing. And so if there's only one car and there are 10 people competing for the car, even if 2 of those people die, still got 8 people who still want it.
Okay. Well, Terry, thank you very much. We really could be here till midnight, but I don't want to be. So I'm gonna sort of call a question. It sounds like that we have sort of consensus to move forward with the recommended steps. Is that true? We'll show of hands. Okay. So Terry, we want to go ahead with the recommended steps and stay with it.
Sure. And we'll be back to you,
Yeah.
with the NOAA program and sort of wrap this into
Okay.
a larger discussion about housing,
right.
because I think all of it comes together.
Oh, just not enough housing discussion going on.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
You bet. Thanks so much. Okay, that takes care of our agenda items. Probably next is
Staff reports.
Reports.
Yeah, Lauren just has a real quick update on our city plan.
Yes, very brief PSA. Many of you received an email from Ashley Holland, but this is a big week for Let's Talk. So a reminder that our city plan survey is live on What's Up Wheat Ridge, and the open house is this Thursday, the rec center. If you're in the first 200 people on a very hot Thursday, you get Kona Ice. And we'll have a lot of our active projects there, Lutheran, sustainability, and others among them. So PSA, thank you.
Is that it? Yep. Okay, elected officials matters. Counselor Hulteen.
I'll be quick. This Friday, we are presenting at the All-America City Award. Mayor, Councilmember Snell and I will be there, and we are being recognized for lifetime achievement and really celebrating how much this city works with its community. We ask the questions, we listen, and we take action together, and we're getting recognized nationally for that. And I think the foundations of that way of governance and community engagement is played out tonight as we've had these discussions. So I'm just really excited and proud of that, and we'll look forward to sharing stories on the other side.
Terrific. Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to announce real quick, this weekend, all over District 3, specifically, the Sustainable Applewood is doing Yard Sale Palooza, and there's currently, I believe, 60 or so yard sales going on the permit. So if you're anywhere around Applewood this weekend, near Color Strand, Prospect Valley and all that area, check out the swap meet going on all over there. I also wanted to thank you, Councilor Snell and Councilor Larson, for joining myself and the Wheat Ridge Coalition for Education in passing out Future Farmer shirts to all the kindergartners over the last couple weeks. Class of 2036. Ooh, that hurt a little bit. So hopefully we'll have some flying cars by then. If not, they'll design it. But I really want to thank everybody, Dom Brenton, Liz Romero, Lisa Denton, everybody who put that together. It was an amazing time. Everybody that came was really cool. So thank you.
Other, Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. This Thursday, June 6th, marks the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings on the coast of France. On that day, more than 184,000 Allied armed forces from Great Britain, Canada, and the U.S. came ashore along a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast. Although the landing area would not be secured for another week, the beachhead gave Allies a starting point for a year-long campaign that resulted in the defeat of the German army in the West and the end of World War II in Europe. My uncle, Edward E. Larson, my dad's older brother, was a 22-year-old second lieutenant in the Army's famed 33rd Armored Regiment. Second Lieutenant Edward E. Larson was killed in action September 7th, 1944. And it is for heroes like that that we are free. On a closer note to home here, I did take a tour of the Concrete Works facility at 48th Avenue, and this is the place that prepares all the concrete for this, the Wadsworth rebuilding project. And I was impressed with some of the safety measures that they have in place and the efficiency of that plant. It is a temporary plant, and after the construction project is finished, all of that material and equipment goes away. But the big question that I asked the super there was, when? When will Wadsworth be finished? And he's hemmed and hawed a bit, but he did say by about this time next year, most of the major concrete paving work for the roadway will be done. The project will continue for maybe another year or 8 months after that, well, for landscaping and sidewalk improvements and whatnot. But we do now see the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional, Councilor Snell.
Just a couple of things really quickly. It was a fun, busy weekend. Sunday, new native xeric garden planted at Panorama Park. The mayor joined us for a ribbon cutting for that new garden with all native water-wise plants done through Sustainable Panorama Park. It was a great morning. That was Sunday morning. Saturday was our neighbors to the south, Edgewater, held their annual Pride Parade. Happy Pride Month, by the way. And it was a great turnout, and our own Wheat Ridge for Equity had a float in the parade, so I want to give a special shout out to everyone who organized that. And coming up this Saturday at Wheat Ridge United Methodist Church, there is a paint drop-off event, and they're partnering with Green Sheen, so you can bring old paint and be able to get rid of it for free. So come to Wheat Ridge United Methodist Church, and it starts at 9, I believe, 9 to 1. So there you have it. That's what I've got. Thanks.
Okay. I'm glad you brought up the sustainable neighborhoods. It was great to be there at Panorama Park for the ribbon cutting for a great Xeriscape opportunity. Next Saturday at 9 a.m. is Coffee with the Mayor at Vinola's Italian Market. You can join us. We'd love to have you. Is there any other business? Not business, but items to come before our study session. Then we will be back here next week at a regular meeting, right? Yes. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you all.